Good morning and welcome to City Hall. We'll get started with the invocation and the Pledge of Allegiance. I'll ask Councilman McAtee if he'll lead us in the invocation. And we have a couple of special guests that are in the audience today, and Councilman Mars is going to introduce them, and they can lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Gary?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mayor. We have a couple of scouts with us from PAC 85, I believe it is, in Bethany. So why don't you gentlemen come up here at the mic real quick.
All right.
Give us your name and what school you're at, and then after Councilman McAtee is through with the invocation, if you'd start us in the Pledge of Allegiance. What's your name?
My name is Ryan Mills, and I go to Bethany Middle School, and I'm currently working on my star rank, and we're grateful to be here.
Okay.
My name is Jack Spear. I am going to be going to Bethany Middle School, and I am a tenderfoot, and I'm here to be working on my citizenship in the community.
All right. Good luck with that. Councilman?
Let's pray. Father, we thank you for this opportunity to come together as citizens of Oklahoma City, concerned for the future of our city. We thank you for the guidance, the protection that you provided us in the past, for the blessings that you have accorded us. We would ask for wisdom this morning as we continue to look at the plans for next year, that what we do might not only benefit each of our citizens, but might bring glory and honor to you. For it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'll call the meeting to order and then recess the council meeting to convene as the Finance Committee. We have presentations on the fiscal year 11-12 budget.
Thank you, Mayor. Our game plan for this morning is to have 4 departmental presentations. We're going to have public transportation and parking, followed by information technology, followed by general services and utilities, in the same format we've had over the last several Finance Committee meetings. And then we will answer council questions on that, and then we will adjourn the Finance Committee, convene the City Council, and then there will be a public hearing on the budget process to get any public input. This was advertised at last week's council meeting that we would have the public hearing today. And then we will discuss, there's a City Manager's report about a couple of council requests that I would like to have some discussion and direction on. And then after that, it's our intent to go into executive session and talk about negotiations. So that's our game plan for this morning. And so with that, we're going to start with the 4 departmental presentations. And first up is public information and public transportation and parking with Rick Kane.
Thank you. As we get started this morning, I just want to take the opportunity. I've got a number of senior staff members here, so I want to acknowledge their presence. They're here to answer the tough questions. And then we also have one of our trustees, Mr. Dick Lee, who serves as vice chairman of the COPPA Board of Trustees, that's here this morning as well. You will find the information on the Public Transportation and Parking Department. It begins on page 361 in your budget book, but I will call your attention that a number of the numbers that I'll be presenting today will not match what's in your budget book, and that's simply because the budget book focuses on those items that the city pays for or funds, and in our case, we also have a number of sources of funding that come in outside the city, and so as a result, some of my numbers will be significantly larger than what you see in your budget book. It's typical for us every time that we go through one of these budget processes that we take a look at our mission statement. We also take a look at our issues and strategic results and determine whether those are still appropriate or whether it's necessary for us to make changes. We did that again this year, and we decided that this year we're consistent with what we had identified last year, and so there are no significant changes in either the issue statements or the strategic results. I do want to start today by just highlighting a couple of the issues that we have and talk about some of the several of our strategic results, just to bring you up to date on our progress and the achievements that we made in these areas. We're certainly excited about all the development that's taking place in Oklahoma City, and we want public transportation to be a significant player in that and support those development efforts. But that development presents us with a number of challenges. You would expect that with the surge of the increase in the price of gasoline, we had a number of requests from citizens trying to find out about options in public transportation. And not surprisingly, when someone has an option of a car or taking public transportation, when we tell them that a bus only comes by every 40 minutes or every hour, or there are large areas of the city that we simply do not service, at least service without having to walk a quarter of a mile or a half a mile to get to either the bus stop or their final destination, most of those individuals decide public transportation is not a good fit for them. And so we really don't see the bump in ridership that you might otherwise expect, particularly in other large metropolitan areas. With the success of the Thunder this year, we had a number of phone calls come in to us trying to say, do you have bus service down to the games, people's perception of trying to avoid the traffic and congestion and the parking issues. Unfortunately, again, we're somewhat limited in what we can do from the standpoint of charter regulations that are imposed upon us from the Federal Transit Administration. And for those routes that do service and could move people down to the arena, our problem is we can get you down there for the game, but we can't get you home because our service is off the street by 8 o'clock at night. So again, it's another portion of the population that just simply finds us unacceptable as an alternative for transportation. And probably one other one that I would like to highlight, because there's been a lot said about it recently, even here at the council meetings, is the fact that we have the opening of the new outlet mall at Council Road and I-40. Unfortunately, we don't service that area very well. We actually do have one route that gets out to Council Road. That's our Route 23, which travels northeast, northwest 23rd Street. Unfortunately, that route does not come down to the transit center. So if you're anywhere that's not immediately adjacent to 23rd Street, you're going to have to get on another bus, make that connection to 23rd route, and then get over to the outlet malls. Unfortunately, the closest direct route that we have that leads the downtown transit center and the core of downtown falls short. It ends up at Rockwell, and so you're a mile away from the outlet mall. So when we think in terms, particularly if we have conventioneers in town and the spouses want to do some shopping, we are just not very convenient. Unless you're a public transit rider in some other city, you tend to avoid having to make transfers. You much prefer to get on a bus, particularly if you're not sure where you're going, and know that you can get off at your destination. Making transfers only complicates the trip. So those are challenges that continue to, we continue to have to deal with. We do evaluate our service in terms of riders per bus service hour. This year we had a target of 16.22. Next year we've set a fairly aggressive target of 18, but we feel very comfortable that we're going to be able to make that. And again, our staff works diligently to tweak our routes to try to get to those places where we see demand, but unfortunately we have a diverse demand that comes to us, and many times we're not able to satisfy those requests. We are going to, it is our game plan to introduce some new technology this year, automated vehicle location technology, which is going to, we feel, enhance our ability to not only manage our system, but to provide information to our riders. Through automated vehicle location, we'll be able to have real-time information so we know at all times where our buses are located. That helps us better manage our system, being able to identify where we may have problems on routes and react more quickly to those problems. At the same time, if a rider, if a patron of our system has access to the internet, they will be able to identify a specific route and know when that route is perhaps going to be coming by their bus stop. Additionally, we're partnering with that system once we have it up and running. We also have a couple of other things that we're going to do. The Federal Transit Administration requires us to announce bus stops as we approach major intersections and other what we would identify as key stops. Right now, that's incumbent upon our drivers to do that. Not surprisingly, with about 120 drivers, some do it better than others. Once we have the automated vehicle location system on our buses, we'll actually be able to program that into the bus so it automatically makes those announcements. So the whole concept is if someone has a visual impairment, they may not be able to see as well when we're approaching their particular stop, and the announcement is automatically made to give them a heads up that, hey, we're getting close to your stop. Another thing that we'll be able to do is automated passenger counting. That's significant to us because we think it's going to contribute to a real efficiency in our system. Right now, we have to report a number of different facts and data to the Federal Transit Administration, one of which is ridership and where people get on and get off. So every month, we have part-time people who ride our buses with a piece of paper and a pencil and literally have to record where people are getting on and getting off on our routes. Very labor-intensive, that we then have to bring that paper pencil data back and then upload that into a file system so that we have a reporting structure for the FTA. With automated passenger counting, we'll be able to automatically, through our AVL system, know where people get on and get off, and we'll have that real-time data so that at the end of the route, all we have to do is download that, and we don't go through that laborious process that we're currently doing. So we really feel that we're going to achieve some efficiencies through the better use of technology. We are going to continue to work to build on the momentum that we've gained this past year in addressing some of our strategic results. We are going to continue to push for more reliable service. And excuse me, I haven't been keeping up here. We want to do that through a couple of ways. One of our ways is we need to standardize our fleet. We currently have 5 different types of vehicles in our fleet. So you can understand that from our maintenance standpoint, that means they've got to understand the workings of 5 different types of buses, and we have to store the inventory for those 5 different types of buses. Perhaps a bigger issue, and one that I need to make you sensitive to, is the fact that we need to be sure that we're in a position to timely replace our buses. And you've heard me preach this before in some of the transit workshops, that on average our buses travel between 50 and 60,000 miles a year. If there's federal money invested in any of those buses, our minimum requirement for keeping that bus on the street is 12 years. You do the math and you understand that by the time that bus is eligible for retirement, we've got somewhere between 600 and 700,000 miles on those buses. Frankly, they're worn out. So it's critical that we be able to replace those on a timely basis. In the past, we've done that using discretionary federal funding, or another way of saying that is earmarks. And you're well aware of the situation in Washington, D.C. and the move away from earmarks. So that's going to put increasing pressure on us to find the capital funding that we need to be able to replace our buses on a timely basis. And that's why it was so important to us and why I was so appreciative of the action that you took back in 2007 when you included in the general obligation bond offering for the first time ever a component that included a resolution there for buying buses, some capital money. It was $7 million. It was a small part of the overall bond program, but it was significant to us because that provided funding for the most recent bus purchase that we were just able to make. So my word to leave with you is that we need to think in terms in the future that when we bring up and we start discussing general obligation bond issues, we need to always think about having a transit component included in that bond issue. We did this April introduce some new vehicles to our fleet. We purchased 2 CNG buses and 1 hybrid electric bus. We are using those now in a pilot program. We chose Route 23 primarily because it's one of the routes that actually has 3 buses on it. We have a diesel bus, a brand new diesel bus that we purchased, one of the CNGs, and the hybrid electric bus assigned to Route 23. Our concept there is we wanted to try to duplicate as much as possible the operating conditions that all of these buses are working under. And so from that standpoint, we've assigned these to the route. We're going to be keeping records on their performance and their cost effectiveness. We just started in April, so at this point in time, there's not a lot of data to report yet. We did present to our cockpit board on Friday the first results, where basically was a calculation showing how many miles per gallon we're getting, and then based on the cost of a per gallon price, how they rank. Just for your information, the hybrid electric bus gets more miles per gallon than the diesel, than the CNG, but when you factor in the price of diesel fuel now versus CNG, actually the CNG comes out to be cheaper in terms of operation if all you're considering is the fuel source. Again, we don't have enough miles on those buses yet to really know the maintenance costs that are associated with them. Each of these buses has special requirements, special fuels, or not fuels, but special fluids that they need to maintain them. And so over time, we'll have a better cost history of what it's taking to maintain those so that we can understand the most effective use of our capital funds as we move forward in our bus purchases. Okay. Last year, when we were making our budget presentation, I talked about facility improvements that we're making, specifically out at our maintenance facility. We've completed phase 1 of those facility improvements. We made substantial upgrades, including lighting and exhaust systems to give a better working environment to our mechanics. We also did a number of improvements so that we could safely work on CNG vehicles. We knew they were coming, and so at the same time we were doing renovations to our facility, we made some changes to accommodate that CNG. So again, we will continue through staff training, through a timely replacement of equipment and facility improvements to continue to work to improve the reliability of our service to our passengers. This graph is in here. It really talks in terms of reliability to us means fewer bus failures. Now, the Federal Transit Administration has a number of things that we have to report, and one of them is bus breakdowns. We refer to bus breakdowns literally as when a bus breaks down in service and can no longer go forward, and that's the requirement that we have to watch for FTA. From our perspective, that didn't really tell a true story. So when you look at our graph here, it looks like we're doing terrible compared to where we were last year. But essentially what we've done is staff has taken the step to really become, what I want to say, more strict in the way that we measure our results. Particularly today would be a great example. If the weatherman's right and it gets up into the high 90s today, if you were a passenger on our bus and we didn't have air conditioning, you can bet it would not be a very comfortable ride and you would not be a happy camper. From an FTA perspective, we don't have a bus problem, but from our perspective, we have a bus problem. So whether it's having air conditioning in the summer or heat in the winter, or whether it's having a fare box that works, from our standpoint, we've got a bus failure, and so that's the terminology that we're really trying to refer to now as failures and not just simply breakdowns. So we're really scoring ourselves a lot harder than we have in the past. We think that's the fair thing to do because we think it tells a better story about our relationship with our patrons. Last year I talked about our successful installation of cameras on our buses, and we're continuing to see the dividends being paid on those, both through training opportunities and also through the handling of passenger claims that we have. This year we took a different focus, again, trying to enhance safety in the ride that our passengers experience. We worked in partnership with NewView, that's the former Oklahoma League for the Blind, and they brought over staff members to work with our training staff to help our operators become more sensitive to how to deal with people who have special needs. And so we also have another big problem, and that is there doesn't seem to be a standardization within the wheelchair industry in terms of the design of wheelchairs. And whether you're on our bus or whether you're on our vans, we transport a number of wheelchair patrons, and our issue is being able to satisfactorily secure those wheelchairs when they're on our vehicle. We've worked diligently in trying to devise a scheme to do that. This is not a problem unique to just Oklahoma City. This is throughout our transit industry. And so we have gone forward and actually purchased special securement devices. Again, all of this being done to address the needs of special patrons that we have that utilize our services, trying to provide safe transportation for them. We are continuing to partner with the Public Works Department. Every year we have the ability to access what's called enhancement funding, and that enhancement funding can pay for a number of things. One of those things that it does pay for are sidewalk improvements. And so we are taking some of our federal money and trying to partner with the sidewalk program, whether it's through general obligation bond funds or it could be the MAPS 3 monies that are out there, that when the city is doing sidewalk improvements along a bus route, we want to make sure that we can make that connection between the sidewalk and the curb. And so we have some federal money available to do that, and we're partnering on the city projects to try to make that happen in as many places as we can. Another item that we're doing is through, again, some special funding opportunities that are currently available to us, is to work to provide safer street crossings. And by that, we're looking at busy intersections where our buses travel, not only providing the visual street crossing signal there to allow people, or to help people make a safe crossing, but also having an audible message associated with that. So if you do have a visual impairment, you've got the ability to be able to cross that street safely. Customer satisfaction is another strategic result of ours, and we will once again conduct a comprehensive survey this year of both riders and non-riders. The rider portion is pretty easy. It gives us an opportunity to gather their opinions about our service, find out from them what they would like to see changed, what we can do better to make it a better experience for them. But we also, on alternating years, also go out and try to talk to non-riders. We really want to find out their perceptions of public transportation and what is it going to take to get them out of their single-occupant vehicle and try public transportation. We also take this opportunity to gain a lot of information relative to our rider demographics. We have a better understanding of who it is that's using our service and why they happen to be using our service. We do anticipate this year finishing, we're very close to finishing and installing a new trip planning module that'll be online so that instead of having to rely solely on our customer service representatives to help you plan a trip, if you want to try to travel on our buses, you'll be able to go online and be able to input an origin and a destination. And then we're going to give you several choices. We're going to tell you if you want to take the fastest trip, here's what you need to do. You don't want to do transfers? Okay, here's another way that perhaps you can do your trip. Or perhaps you want to have the least walking distance, either to the bus stop and from the bus stop, and that's an option that you'll have available to you. So we'll give you several ways of looking at it in the sense of what's a better fit for you if you want to take a trip on one of our vehicles. There's a number of changes that we plan for our parking operation. This is one that is a very significant change. It's in process right now. It is a new parking access and revenue control system. This system is going to provide a lot of different options, control options beyond our current ticket or proximity card. If you park in any of our garages, you know, generally you flash your little proximity card that gets you in. The new system is going to be able to take credit cards as well as cash. It also is going to have the ability to have automatic vehicle identification, which is very similar to what you experience if you use the toll roads, the turnpikes, and the device that sits inside your vehicle, and it scans it as you approach the garage. That's how it will work. We're going to be introducing pay and lane options right now so that you don't necessarily have to go through the cashier. If you want to pay by credit card, you'll have that option to do that. We're also going to introduce pay-on-foot abilities. We're going to have machines located in the Cox Center as well as the Santa Fe garage so that you can actually pay for your parking in advance of getting in your car and exiting, and then after you make that payment, you'll have a certain amount of time that will enable you to get in your car, and then when you get down to the exit gate, all you have to do is insert the ticket that validates that you made your payment, and out you go. So again, those kinds of things, hoping to expedite the exiting of a garage and increasing the enjoyment of your parking experience. We're also going to be installing vehicle counting systems. Up in the upper corner of the picture shows one of those. If you've parked in the Santa Fe garage or the City Center garage, you know that you have a spiral ramp that you have to travel. When you get to the top of that ramp, the logistics are such that it's very difficult to see whether there's available spaces. Rather than having to drive around in that floor to see if there's an empty space, we'll have these signs available at the top of that entry ramp that will tell you whether the floor is full or whether there's additional parking that's available. Again, we think this will make it easier on people as they utilize our garage system. We're going to have special barcoding capabilities, reading barcode capabilities. This was a significant item when we did our negotiations with the Thunder. You've gone to Thunder games. You know that when you have a Thunder ticket that they do a barcode scan when you enter the arena. If you are one of their patrons that has specific parking, they give you a separate parking pass that you use to park in our facilities. What this will enable us to do now, instead of having multiple tickets or passes from the Thunder, we'll be able to use the game ticket. When you pull into our garage, we'll be able to scan that. It validates the fact that you're a legitimate parker for that system and thereby simplify the whole process. It also helps from the standpoint that if you're a Thunder patron who gets tickets to special events, you'll also be able to barcode that special event ticket and handle your parking in the same way, which gives us better control and in turn gives them a better control as well over the users of our system. Finally, one other thing to just identify is the fact that we're also working with the hotels downtown who utilize our parking garages for their customers. This new system will allow us the ability to work with those hotels so that your card key that you use in your hotel room can also be used to allow you access to our garages. So we no longer have to use the cumbersome system that we currently do, which requires a lot of control, not only from our standpoint, but from the standpoint of the hotel as well. Wanted to just mention fixed route bus ridership. Generally speaking, you know, that's how most people evaluate our service. If your ridership's going up, they think you're doing a good job. If your ridership's going down, you're doing a bad job. There were a couple of things that happened this year that I wanted to mention, and that is, you might recall last year when we were going through the tough economic times, we actually had to raise our bus fares for the first time in about 6 years or 7 years. There's a rule of thumb within the transit industry that says for every 10% you raise your price, you should anticipate losing about 3% of your ridership. We went from $1.25 to $1.50, so we raised our prices 20%, and therefore, theoretically, we could have expected a 6% loss of ridership if we were going to follow the typical trend. Actually, we're seeing that our ridership this year is about the same level as last year. So from our standpoint, that's a plus. The other thing to consider is we made some minor service reductions last year. Another reason why you would expect ridership to drop as opposed to stay level. And in spite of those reductions that we did not see a significant change in our ridership. And finally, you'll see this big dip out there in the month of February. You know, for the first time in my history of working here, which has been over 20 years, we actually had to cancel service. We canceled service on 3 days during that 2-week snowstorm. I had staff go back and take a look at a typical ridership day. Had we not experienced that 2 weeks of snow, how did it impact us? And our estimate is somewhere between 50 and 60,000 riders were lost on our service as a result of those snow days to what we would typically expect. So you add in that 60,000 number, 50 to 60,000 number, and all of a sudden you see we're actually ooching up a little bit better than we did last year in spite of the fare increase, in spite of the bad weather. And one other thing that came out of it that we also thought was a positive, last year when we raised our prices, we actually took a look at our pass, the way we structure our passes, and we introduced a couple of new passes with the hopes that people would take advantage of those passes, because if you do, you actually are saving money as opposed to paying for every time you get on the bus. We've seen a 12% increase in the use of passes on our system, which again is a very, very positive thing for us and also a positive thing for our users. I wanted to highlight very quickly, it came out of our first workshop that we had, excuse me, when we talked about what are the characteristics of a successful transit system, and one of those characteristics we identified was the fact that most good transit systems have a high level of frequency. That bus is coming by at a very regular time, or a very frequent time, and we talked a lot about frequency on our system. And as I mentioned, you know, you get on our routes and it can be 40 minutes, it can be an hour before that next bus comes by. From that discussion, you said, well, let's do a pilot program. Let's take a look at a route or two and see what happens if we add additional service to that route. We did it on Route 8 and we did that on Route 40. On Route 8, we went from 60-minute headways or frequency down to 40-minute frequency, and we've seen over the last little over more than a year and a half, we've seen about a 15% increase in our ridership. On Route 40, we went from 65-minute frequency to 33-minute frequency, literally cutting it in half, and we've seen a significant increase in ridership jump there of 28%. So it's been a while since I reported those numbers to you. I just wanted to give you an update as to where we stand on both of those. Again, demonstrating that if you increase frequency, you will increase your ridership as it becomes more convenient for people.
Rick, may I just make a quick comment? I'm looking at Route 8, and it talks about where it's serving, and it's serving Shepherd Mall, Twin Square Mall, French Market Mall, Lakeshore Mall. I think we better take a look at the Outlet Mall and figure out if we can get some service out there.
We are looking at that, but I'm not going to say it's easy, but we'll figure out a way to get there.
Great.
Rick, with regard to the information you've shown us on Route 8 and Route 40, Do you have other routes that you think that same technique would apply to? You have other routes? Could you pick another one to do something like? Yeah, as I remember, the amount of money that it cost in relation to the size of the whole budget, when we increased frequency on 8 and 40, it wasn't that significant. It was significant in terms of what we usually spend on transportation budgets, but it wasn't, in an overall sense, significant. Do you have other routes that you were presently operating that you think you might be able to have the same kind of success? Or on Route 8, for example, what if we accelerated it to a more frequent, more like tell me what you said 8 was and is.
It was 60 minutes and went to 40 minutes.
And went to 40, and the other was 65 and went to 33.
Correct.
Do you have a suggestion? I mean, these were two suggestions you brought to us. We didn't, unless there's something that I don't know. None of us have any independent expertise about which routes are the ones that it might work on. Do you have another one that we might try it on?
We typically always keep looking at that and identify from what we think would generate additional ridership, keep something at the top of the list so we know where to go. We did that, and we do that in a couple of ways. We recognize there's funding issues on any of these things we do. Route 14, which is one that services actually the southeast part of the city, is a route that right now we've actually had to add time to it because we've got so many people riding it. A nice problem to have, but then on the other hand, when you add time to a route, it means that you're going to be riding that bus for a longer period of time. So that is one. That is a weekday service. We looked at what would it cost us to add a bus, recognizing that the number I give you is the city portion of the number. It's not the entire cost, because we do have some federal maintenance recovery that we have, and we also make some assumptions relative to fare box recovery. But to add, what we would recommend on Route 14 is a couple of trips in the morning and a couple of trips in the afternoon during the peak period. That would take our travel time or our frequency from 45 minutes to 30 minutes. That would cost about $112,000. Another route that we looked at was Route 7, which Route 7 on Saturdays is carrying a large ridership volume. And we thought about taking a look at Route 7. That has a 75-minute frequency. By adding an additional bus on that route, we could cut it down to 40 minutes. Because it's a Saturday-only route, the cost is about $33,000. So there's a big difference when you look at Saturdays, and you're only talking about 52 days out of the month.
Where is Route 7?
Route 7 goes north out of the city. I really need to. I can't remember all of our routes and where all of them go, but I can get that information to you and let you know exactly where that.
I'm just interested in what kind of a service would a Saturday route do? I mean, I understand the weekday routes. I mean, they're taking people back and forth to work for the most part, but a Saturday route.
Saturday route services some workers, fast food workers, hotel, motel type workers. But it is also one of those that goes to the places like the Walmarts and the shopping centers, that sort of thing. That's generally what they're carrying that day. Although, again, we have a high proportion of workers that use our service. And so, I had reported previously that over 50% of our riders are taking our service to work. So there is that on Saturday as well.
I'd like for you to bring back to us both of those with costs. And when you look at the success we have had and continue to have with 8 and 40, it seems to me that those are kind of incremental ways we could take a look at having a better system. I've said this a jillion times, but until we decided to do the downtown transit thing, I had never heard anybody in the bus or the Metropolitan Transit people say anything other than you must have the foundation of a good bus system before you can move to the next level. Only when that thing became a hot item did I hear that that's going to help everything else. I've always heard you built from the bottom up. certainly the success we've seen with 8 and 40 would justify taking a looking at 2 more routes with this, in this budget session, it seems to me. If you get that kind of ridership increase, this is really what public transportation is all about, taking people back and forth to work.
It is, Pete. From a budgetary standpoint, though, a typical metric from a private sector perspective would be that when you've increased the percentages, you've increased your profit or you've increased your revenue to outdo the cost. In this situation, even though we add routes and even though we increase ridership, it's still adding to the subsidy of the system. I don't think anyone's suggesting that we've added a route and it's increased the ridership so much that it's somehow paid for itself.
No, I certainly recognize that public transportation is subsidized, as is airline transportation and rail transportation and trucks and highways. There's no difference between the subsidy that we give people that need a way to get back and forth to work than we give American Airlines, or we give the big trucking companies, or we build motorists when we spend gajillions of dollars on superhighways. It's just what subsidy you're willing to chin.
Well, I think it's important, though, what is the subsidy? Rick, on that, routes 8 and 40 have been so successful in increasing riders. How much did that cost the city increase that ridership level?
I'm drawing a mental blank. Off the top of my head as I stand here, I can't tell you that number. I can get that number for you.
It seems to me that's a critical number. I mean, we get more riders on the bus, that's great, and I think that's we need to try to do that. But we also need to know what the cost of that additional ridership is before we just put on more buses to get more riders and increase above what is a reasonable return on the additional riders that we've got.
Well, I think that's what I'm asking.
Pardon me?
I think that's what I'm asking.
Well, it wasn't very clear. I'm sorry, Mr. White. I just didn't.
But I do think it's a red herring to talk about the subsidy as something that's just out there, and with the presumption that public transportation subsidy is the only subsidy in the world.
I don't think anybody suggests
it's a gigantic subsidy building this freeway down here. Think of the money that we're putting in that, what we put in airlines, what we put in the trucking industry. I mean, so we subsidize lots of things.
Nobody arguing that, but my question is how much is that subsidy? How much does it cost to get those additional riders on board? And if we knew that, we could look then at some alternatives, I think, more intelligently. That's my only point.
Right.
We did a report on that, city manager report, I can't remember how many months ago, 8 months ago on that, after we had some data on it. We can certainly bring that back and update that information.
I think that's important to know that kind of number. I mean, I'll argue with the fact that public transportations are subsidized and they need to be subsidized. But I think we need to know what the cost of that subsidy is before we go forward.
I agree.
Rick. Rick, I've got the microphone. Let me ask you another question. You, in your earlier slide, presented a metric of passengers per bus service hours, and you had 16.2 as a goal for this year, and you increased it to 18.
Yes.
In an absolute fashion, those numbers don't mean anything to me. Is 16.2 a good number? Is it increased historically? I know you're forecasting or hopefully looking at an increase for the coming year. Is 18 a good number? It's 18 out of a million. That's not too good. It's 18 out of 20. That's pretty good. But
let me put it this way. In Oklahoma City, 18 would be a great number.
Well, how does it compare with some of the other bus companies?
Yeah, that's a tough one to answer because of just the nature of our service. Here we call ourselves a large urban environment, yet we operate our system like we're a very small bus company. When we started our LFR reporting, we were down to around less than 14 passengers per hour. So, and again, it's significant when you consider that as we've gone along, if we're cutting services and yet we're still increasing our ridership, that's a positive. And how do we do that? And part of it is eliminating inefficient routes that we have out there, and part of it is just marketing and trying to do a better job to stabilize our ridership base and build on it. So I don't know that I can give you a good answer relative to how good is 18. All I know is we're moving in a positive direction. We're moving up and going from 14 to 18 over the last 3 or 4 years, I view as significant progress. Now, again, it's tough to say how does that compare with a a Tulsa or a Fort Worth or a St. Louis or a Denver. I don't know that.
Okay, thank you. The second question, or an additional question, is on the special buses for the Thunder game. That could be a significant source of revenue for your transportation. Is the federal impediment an absolute prohibition against using those buses? And secondly, we've bought some buses through the GO Bond Fund. Are they subject to the same restrictions that the buses we acquired with federal money?
We're not subject to the restrictions that we have to keep them for 12 years, and that was one of the reasons why we used the GO bond money to purchase our alternative fueled vehicles, so that if we made a bad decision and one of those doesn't produce, we're not saddled with it for 12 years. They do inherit some characteristics, even though it's not purchased with federal money, because we're maintaining them with federal funds. And so there's certain things we have obligation to the Federal Transit Administration, but keeping the bus for 12 years would not be one
Well,
of those.
I understand it, but that wasn't the thrust of my question is there a way, under the federal regulations, any way at all, that we could provide special bus service from outlying parking lots downtown for the Thunder?
Here's how it works. If it is something that we're doing for a special event like a basketball game and we're not doing it as a matter of routine, what we have to do is we have to advertise that we're interested in doing that. If there's any willing and able private contractor and they don't even have to be in Oklahoma City, they can be in Tulsa for that matter, that says we're willing to do that, then we are prohibited from doing that service. If we go ahead and do that service and any private operator out there says, hey, I didn't know about it, I didn't agree to it, they can go to the Federal Transit Administration, and the Federal Transit Administration could cut off our funding. That was kind of an idle threat in the past, but we now have seen examples across the country where private operators have come back and challenged the transit system and said, I could have done that, I just didn't know about it, and caused the FTA to come down on some transit systems and really hold up their federal funding. For us, that would be devastating. And so, frankly, we've kind of taken the position that right now, our relationship with the private carriers here in the market, I feel my relationship with them is okay, but clearly we have looked in the past at doing things, particularly the trolleys. We talked about using trolleys. When we first got trolleys, there was a lot of interest in using those for special events and weddings, and we still get requests. I responded to a request yesterday from Heritage Hills who wanted to do a historic home tour and use a trolley, and I frankly had to say, sorry, I can't do it, because the private sector came back and said, oh, we don't own any trolleys, but we don't want you doing that service. And the federal government does not distinguish between a trolley and a bus. To them, it's all a rubber tire vehicle. And so from that standpoint, we had to stop using trolleys for special charter service. So it's a very difficult situation.
The short answer is it's not impossible, but it's difficult.
Extremely difficult.
Okay. The second or additional question is I would encourage you to look at some kind of extensions of service, as Councilman Salyer pointed out, to the outlet mall. There'll be over about 1,100 people working out there at very low-paying jobs, unfortunately, and the retail starting positions. And a bus service out there would not only help shoppers, it would help the employees get out there to work, which I think is important. And the final question, I'm not sure that you've gotten to this slide yet, but I'm going to take advantage of the microphone and ask you a question. On your slide that is entitled General Fund Budget Changes, you have a service reduction number of $46,000. Would you give me an example of what kind of service reduction you're anticipating for $46,000?
Sure. Talk specifically to that one. Part of that is the Stagecoach line. You might remember last year we talked about 2 service reductions: Metro Link service, that is our late night and weekend service, Sunday service. The other one was what we were calling at that point in time was the Orange Line trolley service that connects the I-40 Meridian Hotel area to Stockyards that then comes downtown. It was decided not to totally do away with that Orange Line, but rather to save 16 hours of service, so we have 8 on Friday and 8 on Saturday. We renamed it the Stagecoach, and we remarketed that line. Unfortunately, the ridership on that has continued to remain poor at best, and as a result, we're making that recommendation that we reduce that service. That impacts Councilwoman Salyer's ward and Councilman McAtee's ward, and we have been talking with them, keeping them apprised, as well as the constituents out there for the Hotel Motel Association and Stockyards. And unfortunately, it just doesn't produce at the level that we feel it should. And there was also a slight decrease included in that $46,000 number for some service reductions we're doing related to the Oklahoma River cruises. So those are the two.
Rick,
Yes, sir.
the express system, how many express lines do you have?
Right now, the only express line that we have connects with Norman. We run a partnership program with Norman. We run a couple of trips a day. I think they run 3 to 4 trips a day between Oklahoma City and Norman and the university down there.
Is it possible to take the far northern part of the county and create a park and ride express from the north to downtown Oklahoma City?
We could do it. I mean, what it amounts to is we either have to have additional funding to do something like that, or we have to take from our existing services. And again, as you've heard me say multiple times, the difficulty in taking from service is that with 93% of our riders being transit dependent, that means you will be taking service away from people who otherwise have no transportation options. So that's the challenge. Yeah, we could do it, and we've looked at those things at different quadrants within the city of trying to create express bus services. Again, generally what you get into there is you tend to think in terms of peak periods. In other words, take people to work and then take people home in the afternoon. What we found, though, is that there is a built-in resistance to that, and it comes from the standpoint of what happens if I have an emergency. We have actually created a program, a ridership guarantee program that we have available to try to overcome some of those hurdles, where we will allow you a certain number of trips over the course of a year that you can take a cab home if you were to have an emergency. But again, those are it's an allocation issue. Where do you want to put your resources? And so the short answer is yes, we could do it, but we got to figure out how to fund it.
Well, if you had to look at all the routes, would there be any routes, if you had your choice, to eliminate just because of the low ridership? And when you look at the north part of Oklahoma City, and just like you said, the express from Norman, I think that there's a large population of people who are demanding an opportunity to have, a ridership to downtown Oklahoma City. I mean, with gas at $4 a gallon, and when you look at the geographics and the population increase, the density in those particular areas, surely it would be profitable to create a park and ride. And some of these routes, I see the bus system sometimes, and I swear, I'm wondering, why do we even have that route? Because I never see anybody on the bus. And I'm just wondering if there are places where you have the potential of increasing the ridership, and we have these lines where, it just seems like that they're just running up and down the street, and create some of these lines that you would get more ridership. It just seems like sometimes we just need to tweak the whole system.
We have eliminated most of there's always a lowest ridership route. There always is, and we've cut back on a number of the lower ones in the past, and every time we do that, obviously, there are people that are riding on our poles and come in and talk to us about that. So the ones that are where the woeful performers have been gone for a while. But we'd be happy to come back and take a look at what the cost would be for an express route for some place, and where we can talk to you and find out exactly whatever you want to serve, and we can take a look at the cost of doing those type of routes. And we can also take a look at bringing back some costs on routes 14 and 7 and what those would cost, and maybe a couple of others we'll take a look at and see what else is in the system that could be done. And then we'll also bring back and update the city manager report we did 6-8 months ago regarding routes 8 and 14, and update that information and provide you with the increased ridership and the costs associated there too on those.
In conjunction with that, Jim, could we also get a sort of a succinct summary of what the total taxpayer subsidy is for the public transportation?
You'll get that in a second.
Rick does have a lot.
Total one number.
In that, with regard to that, I think we also ought to ask about what we're going to do about the outlet mall. I mean, I think Meg's point was a good one. I mean, I don't know that that's a numbered route, but that certainly ought to be asked.
Yeah.
Also, I want to point out that when we talk about taxpayer subsidies, if you look, I'm skipping ahead, but the big number is the $1.1 million we put in the boats. That's a huge subsidy we put in those boats. And I'd like to see those boats put to the same standard we did to the Orange Line. I mean, if nobody's riding them, we ought to be talking about reducing the number of trips. I mean, if we could save some money there, we could spend that money where people are actually needing the transportation back and forth to work, which is what a public transportation system's all about. I mean, I talk about this every year, and then every year I decide I'm not going to talk about it again, and then right before the meeting I think, why not talk about it? I mean, it's the elephant in the room when we talk about what subsidies were given to public transportation. So I'd like for it to be looked at least the same way we look at all these other routes where we're cutting routes off for people that actually need it, as opposed to tourists or somebody that wants to have a birthday party.
And just to be clear, the subsidy of the boats is not $1.1 million, it's 600?
670,000.
Yes, 600, yeah.
Rick, you want to continue?
Sure. Let me back up, because I did say I had staff here to help with the hard questions, and when I have my senior moments, they did, talking about where does Route 7 go. It goes to Northwest 10th and Penn, goes out as far as 63rd and Independence, hits Lakeview Apartments, Shepherd Mall. Those are some of the stops along the route. I just wanted to identify for the benefit, I know that most of you know the services that we provide, but for the public, we are more than just big buses. Excuse me, we do manage a number of other services. This listing is some of the special services that we provide. Most of these are oriented services for older adults or persons with disabilities. I was just going to identify a couple of them just as examples. Supplemental transportation for elderly persons. We refer to the acronym as the STEP program. This is a donation-based van service that goes around and picks up seniors and takes them once a week to do grocery shopping. We have the congregate meal program. This is a program that's oriented, again, for seniors 60 and older to qualify. You have to live in a specific service area, and we will provide round-trip van service to a meal site. We take you there in the morning so you can participate in activities, and then you get a nutritious meal, and then we take you home at the end of the meal. We also have the the Share Fare program. You're familiar with that. That's a discounted taxi service. A patron pays 60% or pays $6 for $10 worth of taxi fares. Metro Transit provides the other 40%. That 40% is really provided through, in the case of Oklahoma City, through CDBG funding that we coordinate with the planning department on that to provide that. The nice thing about the Share Fare program is because it's a cab service, it's 24/7. And so it gives you transportation options when we're not out there providing bus service. Try to move along quickly here. Last year I indicated that we were going to see a drop in our parking occupancy once Devon opened up their new garage and their 1,500 employees relocated. That's what you see happening here on this particular graph. I've already discussed the parking improvements that we're planning to make relative to our equipment upgrade. A couple of other things just to make you aware. On Friday, the COTPA staff was just authorized to negotiate with an architect so that we can do a complete renovation of the Santa Fe garage, not just talking, I'm sorry? Including the elevators, elevator cabs, lobbies, retail space, and exterior of the building. So we also have had, for several months now, we've had in process, we had a consultant come in who's doing a comprehensive review of all of our garages from the standpoint of structural integrity and also taking a look at our operations so that when we get the results of that report, which we anticipate within the next couple of weeks, COTPA staff will be able to sit down with our board and put together some priorities in terms of how do we address the physical needs of our facilities that covers our entire system. And then one other thing to mention to you, and that is the parking study that we're conducting to be completed probably either late this month or the early part of July. We actually have a consultant who's been taking a look at the entire downtown area, not just the central business district, but they've looked at Bricktown, Automobile Alley in the Midtown area as well, to try to see where is that parking, not only the parking demand today, but where do we anticipate parking demand based on all the number of economic development things that are taking place in the area, and give us some projections in terms of where do they think, when and where do we need to be prepared to build a parking garage. They're also looking at this not just as off-street parking, but on-street parking as well. I mean, we really need to have a coordinated program that deals with on-street and off-street parking, whether it's talking about setting rates, whether it's talking about time limits that you put on meters. How do we integrate our on-street and off-street parking so it operates as a complete system rather than right now it really does sort of operate independently of each other? Highlight some partnerships that we really do seek out in partnerships at every opportunity to not only promote public transit but also to promote a healthy lifestyle. You might be familiar with our program with Platt College. Through contributions from Platt College, our downtown trolley system is free. Our fare used to be 25 cents to ride the trolley. Now you can get on and you pay nothing. It's a free service. The result of that is we've had over a 70% increase in ridership in the downtown trolley, and I got to believe the majority of that increase just comes from the fact that it's now free and people are less inhibited about getting on the trolley. We have a long-standing program that we called the Rhodes Scholar Program, but our marketing folks have reworked that program. We're working with the Foundation for Oklahoma Public Schools. In conversations we've had with foundation members, we found out that there was a significant transportation gap as it relates to field trips for schools. If you're a teacher and you want to take your class on a field trip, you've got to go essentially rent your bus from the school system, and for some classes that's just prohibitively expensive. So what we've talked to the foundation about, they're sending them our way, and if you are taking a field trip, let's say you're going to the Oklahoma City Zoo, you work with our staff, and your requirement is you need to meet our bus at a bus stop. There's nothing special. You get on our bus, you ride it out to the zoo. We're providing this as a free service. It gives us an opportunity to help reach younger children and introduce them to public transportation. And the interesting thing is not only the kids, but the adult sponsors, the feedback we get from them is, this is really a much nicer bus than we thought it was going to be. They particularly like the fact that our buses are air-conditioned and city school buses are not. So it's been a very positive program, and again, we're real appreciative of the support we're getting the foundation, because a number of teachers will go to the foundation soliciting financial support to make these trips, and now what they're doing is saying, no, go talk to Metro Transit and see if they can't handle this trip for you, and there's no cost associated with it.
Rick, how do the kids end up getting to the bus stations, though? I mean, the bus stops.
What we do is we coordinate with their teacher or whoever their adult supervision is, and we identify for them the closest bus stop. We go by a number of elementary and middle schools literally by their front doors, and so they just come out. They have to meet us at the bus stop. We know to anticipate their participation, and so we're looking for them. They get on the bus. I mean, it is a, you know, it's just like a normal bus service, so, you know, we always tell them ahead of time, you know, there may not be enough seats for everybody, or there may be, but that's the chance you take. But then they get on just like you would, and then whether that bus goes direct to, let's say, the zoo, or whether they come down to the transfer center and make a transit center and make a transfer, they can do that as well.
Okay, but we typically will have a bus stop in the vicinity of an elementary school.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Most of these, they're not walking very far to get to where they need to pick up the bus. But again, that's up to their adult supervision to decide whether they want to do that or not. But we pass by a lot of schools. One other activity that we do this year, we plan to do it on October 30th. This is our third annual health fair. We have a health fair down at our transit center. We started this in part the concept kind of originated when we were talking about trying to make it easy for our bus patrons to get flu shots. It kind of grew from there. Now you get flu shots, you get blood pressure checks, you have diabetic risk assessment, dental screenings, hearing screenings. We work with a number of partners, and I'll name a few, and I know I'm not going to name them all, but over the course of what we have done and what we plan to do, City County Health, the OU Dental School, the Oklahoma City Indian Clinic, UCO, and Buy for Less. Interesting with Buy for Less, they not only provide people that give nutrition advice or nutrition education, but they also provide fresh fruit for everybody who participates in the health fair during that day. Okay, moving on to our operating budget real quickly here. Our budget this year is $30 million and change. This is about where we were last year. The transit portion of our budget is by far the largest share, coming in at about 76% of the overall cost. And parking, here are the funding sources for our parking. Our monthly parkers are by far the most significant aspect of our revenue base on parking, providing 56% of our revenue. The significance here is parking will continue as it has over the past decade of being self-sufficient. There is no city subsidy that goes into our parking operation. Besides the off-street parking that we control, we also are responsible for maintaining the on-street parking meters and the collection of monies. The city reimburses us for our collection and maintenance activities, but the money that we collect out of the meters goes directly into the general fund. It does not go into COTPA's bank account. Bus transportation funding this year, our funding sources more closely follow the typical scenario, with the city paying about half the cost of our bus service. I have told you before, and I feel like I need to reinforce this, that because we are what the FTA, the Federal Transit Administration, considers a large urban area, and that is we have the city population, it's in excess of 200,000, we are not allowed to use federal money for operations. However, there's a couple of caveats that the feds have established. One of those is every year we get a certain amount of money that we call our formula money, which is based on population and ridership and a number of other statistics. We are allowed to use 10% of that number for ADA-related services, and so we apply that back against our MetroLift service. Typically, to give you some sensitivity, we get about $7 million a year from the feds in formula funding, so we can take 10% or $700,000 of that and apply it towards our ADA service, which from our perspective is basically covering some of our operating costs. We'll spend closer to $3 million on ADA services, so it in no way pays for the entire service. The other aspect of it is when the feds are buying buses, they are very concerned that you take care of their asset because they have ownership in that bus. And so what they do allow transit systems to do is take a portion of our maintenance expense, and essentially they're calling it capitalized maintenance, but it comes back as reimbursement for some of our maintenance costs, which again, from our perspective, is more of an operating reimbursement. And so when you see 30% of our number up there being federal contribution to our service, again, it primarily comes from those two elements. There's a few other things that are somewhat insignificant, but generally speaking, that's why it's there. So if I'm asked the question, do the feds provide operating assistance, my answer is no, they don't, but. And that's how we get there. And the other thing I wanted to point out, and I've done this in years past, is if you look and you see our state funding we get is about 5% of our budget. That has been fixed now for a number of years. I don't anticipate it to change anytime soon. The state's is a roads and bridges focus, and frankly, public transportation does not play very well out at the state level. So our general fund budget changes. The big change this year from last year, you might recall last year we had access to stimulus funds. So we put in nearly $2 million last year of one-time stimulus monies. This year the city is coming back and replenishing that stimulus payment in essence, so that without doing that we would have had to make significant cuts in our service. And so that is why we have such a big number there. That compensates for last year's change. We are seeing some additional monies coming our way because of anticipated fuel costs. And we are adding a safety analyst position. again, when we talk about safety as being paramount importance to us, one of the things we really have been focusing on and we feel like we need to spend more energies on is decreasing our preventable and non-preventable accidents. There are certain things that we can do, even though you think, well, what can you do for a non-preventable accident? There are things, if we're the front of the line at a stoplight, we try to train our drivers to be cautious and look both ways. Don't assume that oncoming car in the opposite direction is necessarily going to stop just because the light is red. Things like, I hearken back to when I was in the operations area back in the the early 90s. We had a lot of accidents where people would run into the back end of our bus and simply say, gee, I didn't even see you. And you think, well, how could they not see a bus? But the fact of the matter is, what we did is we did something back then that is now commonplace. You think about your vehicles now, they tend to have a stoplight that sits high up maybe in your rear window or additional lights. We did something like that. We analyzed our accidents and said maybe if we put more lights on the rear of our bus, people will see us, and sure enough, it began to work. So there's things we can do. We have, as a department, we spend nearly $750,000 to $800,000 a year on workers' comp injuries through our risk management assessment, a huge number. And we feel like we need to try to work that number down. Now, I understand the workers' comp system is complex, and there's only a certain amount of things we can do, but we really feel we need to work with our operator staff and also our maintenance department staff to try to bring that number down to a more reasonable level. And so we see this safety analyst being able to help us in that capacity. And then I've already spoken to the service reduction number. Mr. Ryan asked that question, and I've talked about the small service reductions that we're actually proposing for next year.
Rick, I think it's important to highlight that $1,924,000 number that's in there. Last year, when we had our budget downturn, we did not cut services to transit. We were able to fill that gap with ARRA federal dollars, federal stimulus dollars. And now this year, as our economy has recovered, we're able to fill that gap with general fund dollars. So again, we're not cutting any significant service with transit. We're keeping the same level. But as our revenues have increased, we've been able to fill that gap and make us whole to our pre-recession type activities with transit.
Bill, so strictly speaking, the repayment is probably not exactly right. It's a replacement of money that we got before. We're not paying any money back to the federal government.
You are correct, sir. You are correct.
Just getting ready to wrap up here. There's just a couple of things I wanted to cover. There are a number of ongoing studies that we're involved with from the parking and/or transit perspective. I've already talked about the downtown parking study that's getting close to wrapping up here in the next month or so. The alternatives analysis, the mayor serves as chairman of that committee, and Councilwoman Salyer is a member of that steering committee. We are soon to wrap up our AA and make our submittal to the Federal Transit Administration. Again, that's a key component of the process. If we hope to get any federal money to help grow our downtown streetcar project, we need to go through this process. We also have the environmental analysis, which is the next step in that federal funding process. We were able to get some small amount of Tiger II grant funding to do that, to enable us to get started. So we anticipate we will be bringing a contract back to the COTPA board in July to put on board a consultant to do that work. We've made that selection. We're currently negotiating that contract, and we will start the environmental assessment process, which is a key component, and I've mentioned this before, that September 30th is kind of an imposed deadline date. We need to have our AA complete and identified the locally preferred alternative or the locally preferred route, and at the same time we need to have the first phase of our environmental done, which is basically a scoping process to say how intense or how deeply do we have to get into an environmental process. We submit that to the FTA. They then begin their evaluation of us as Oklahoma City, given all the other projects that are out there for consideration, before we can move on and hopefully successfully be able to obtain federal funding to grow our system. The multimodal hub site, you're aware that the Santa Fe station has been identified as the potential for the multimodal hub. We are that process is being very close to being completed. The Association of Central Oklahoma Governments has taken the lead in that. Next week, we'll be having an advisory committee meeting, and shortly after that, the consultant will be submitting their final recommendation and proposal, which will not only include the location, but they'll talk about projected costs to make it work. They'll be talking about ridership numbers. They'll be talking about operational elements. How do we make that station work for us as a multimodal site to not only deal with buses and streetcars, but also to talk about potential for commuter rail, high-speed rail, interstate buses, the Greyhound-type vehicles, pedestrians, taxi cabs, that sort of thing. We're trying to incorporate as many modes as possible into the design of our intermodal hub. Two other items. A new alternatives analysis is being proposed. The city manager spoke to this a couple of weeks ago, taking a look at commuter rail possibilities connecting Edmond to downtown Oklahoma City, Norman to downtown Oklahoma City, and Tinker Air Force Base, Midwest City to downtown Oklahoma City. So assuming that all the funding is put together on that, we have about $1 million that's coming from the Association of Central Oklahoma Governments. They have some federal funding that they can apply to the process, and then we need to match that on an 80-20 basis, and that 20% needs to come from the local communities. And again, the city manager spoke to this a few weeks ago, that it looks like all that's going to come together, and that will be another study that will be kicking off, trying to build on the momentum that has been gained relative to taking a look at the potential for commuter rail here in Oklahoma City. And then finally, we did complete the regional transit dialogue, again, another initiative on the part of ACOG. That initial phase, we talked about how do you, what is the governance that would be necessary to oversee a true regional transit operation, talking about how do you fund it, talking about land use policies that could help build the support for this. There is intended to be a phase or a part two. When that's going to take place is yet to be determined. I would anticipate that they will try to get something started next year, but when, I have no idea. Finally, to wrap up, just to emphasize or reinforce again, well, they cut off the power. I can't pull it back up, so I have to ask you to take a look at your slide. But the bottom line is we have minimal service changes. Thank you, Michael. Our bus fare, no bus fare increases, and no increase in our parking costs this coming year, our parking rates. We're going to continue to push for enhancements to our service through the use of new technology. And then finally, we're going to continue to provide an ongoing focus on safe, reliable, and cost-effective services. So with that, I'll try to answer any other questions you might have.
What is the, I'm sorry.
Rick, if you could just indulge me for a minute, that on the last chart where you've got your operating budget right there, you've broken that out with three key components, the bus transit, the parking, and the river transit. What I heard you say earlier was the parking, the $6.3 million for parking is all paid for by fare collection, in effect, by parking fees that you all collect.
Correct.
Okay? So there's no subsidies involved in that at all.
Yeah.
In the area of the river transit, what I heard said is that this $1.1 million expenditure here is offset by roughly $600,000, $500,000 in collections, fare revenue coming in. So the subsidy on that's about $600,000.
670, yes.
Okay, so we're getting almost 50% recovery on the operation of the river. We're subsidizing about 50%, and we're collecting 50% in revenue.
Yes, and we get that from two pieces. We get that from the fares that people pay to ride the service, and we also get some federal assistance on the river.
And then in the area of bus transit, the budget is $22,892 for the operation of the bus service, but on a previous chart on fare collection, we're collecting about $2.4 million. So we're collecting about 11 cents of our operating budget from the fares, and the rest is coming from other sources.
That's correct.
Have I got that right?
You've got it right.
Thank you, sir.
Sure.
Yep. So what is the ridership on the river transit?
The raw number or just in general?
Well, from Councilman McAtee's statement, the funds is collected from the river transit, it's over 600, is that what you're saying?
Well, no, what we were saying is that the city subsidy is about $670,000, so you've got another $500,000 that comes from other sources. And those other sources either comes from the fares that people pay to ride it, and we do have some federal subsidy or some federal assistance that also plays into the river costs.
So if you take out the federal assistance, what would be the approximate raw number of just
I think our federal assistance that we're going to collect this year is about, $150,000, thereabouts. That's probably a good guess number. So we collect over $300,000 in fares. Now, understand the fare to ride the boats is significantly higher than the fares to ride our public transit, our rubber tire buses.
David?
Rick, I have a few questions and comments. First of all, I'm a big proponent of public transportation. I think every city needs to be able to provide those services. And in fact, when I go to other cities, larger, more urban type ones, one of the things I like to do is try out their various means of public transportation. So I hope we never give up on this, although Oklahoma City is certainly a challenge given the fact that it's spread out and we're so used to driving our own vehicles. But I do think it's very important. I also think as a city, we need to always find ways to take a lead in looking at alternative fuel sources, and I hope we continue to look at the possibility of increasing the fleet with either CNG or electric hybrid buses. I think sustainability is an important issue here for us in Oklahoma City, although we've not given it a lot of attention, but it's going to just continue to grow in importance, and so I encourage us to really take the lead, even when it may cost us more money to utilize those types of vehicles. I think it's important. And secondly, if we focus on CNG, that helps the state economy, just given the fact we have such extremely large reserves of natural gas. I would certainly encourage us to use that source of fuel whenever possible. Now, may I ask a couple of questions? Do you maintain, in your opinion, a good, consistent schedule of the buses on their routes? I mean, do they arrive at a particular bus stop within a few minutes each time it's supposed to?
Here's how we monitor that, and that's one of the things that, going back to our use of technology, when we can get our AVL in process, we'll be able to better evaluate that. Right now, our rules are this. A bus should never be early, but we consider it on time if we're there at a stop within 4 minutes.
Okay.
So we've got a window of never early, but you can be 4 minutes late and still be considered on time. The way that we measure that right now is we actually assign supervisors the responsibility during the course of the day and randomly be at different locations and sit there and monitor, is that bus coming by, and if it is, at what time is it coming by versus what time should it be arriving at our stop. So it's not the most scientific, but it's the best way we've got to go right now. I anticipate, we put up a target and we said 90% this year. We're going to shoot for 95%. We may report 95%, but honestly, I don't think we're doing that well. When we have automated vehicle location, we'll actually be able to have real-time numbers, more than just our simple sample survey that we do. And I suspect that initially we'll probably see our on-time performance drop down, but it gives us the ability now to find out where our problems are, whether it's a driver issue. I mentioned Route 14 earlier. The nice thing about Route 14 is the problem was that we couldn't maintain our schedule, and it was because we had so many riders. We get a better grasp of what those situations, what those factors are. It helps us to better manage our system.
Okay. Next question. Do we have regular bus service from the airport to the downtown area?
No, we don't. We did a pilot on that several years ago, and there just wasn't the demand. We do actually have one route that goes out there primarily in the morning and in evening hours, and one time during midday, which for the sole purpose of transporting, I say sole purpose, that's probably not what I should say, primarily to transport workers to the airport.
I see.
But the reality is, we've not found that that's been successful at this point in time.
Okay. If you ran a service just for a temporary time, say a week or two, while a show or some type of an exhibit was occurring out at the fairgrounds, a special route, but it's temporary for a week or two, would you run into the same problems you discussed with regards to opening that service up to private transport companies?
It depends on a couple of things. Number one, we have the ability to make detours off of a route. Now, the question is, what's a legitimate detour, and how far can you really go before who's kidding who, and you're really creating a new route? That we couldn't do. A minor detour we could do. It depends on the nature of the environment. You know, just recently they hosted the Super Bowl down in Texas, and the FTA does make special arrangements or special allowances for special events that take place in a city, but it needs to be a coordinated effort with the private contractors. So before we could just go out and do something like that, we literally would have to, if it was going to be a special route for a very specific time period, we'd first have to open that up to the private sector, and they would have to come back and say, no, we're not interested in doing it.
Okay, and excuse me for having so many questions, but this moves us over into the parking area. Can you use the same apparatus that we currently have in our vehicles on the turnpike for parking, or would it require a second apparatus to be placed in those vehicles?
Well, currently you can't do it, but with the new equipment that we're talking about doing, it has that capability. Now what we need to do is we need to work with the Turnpike Authority and find out, because they are in the process of making some changes in how they're, the device that's going into the car. We had initial discussions with them several years ago about the concept of would they be willing to work on something like this.
Yes.
But we would need to take that back and reactivate those discussions. Part of the issue then comes back to the splitting of fares and the monies and how you do that collection.
Okay.
I've actually had a conversation with Secretary Ridley about that more recently than that, and he would love to talk to us about that, but they're focused right now on doing their conversion from the boxes to the windows, and then they're working with I believe the Tulsa Airport to do a pilot study out there, and they're trying to see, but if that all works out, then he'd be willing to talk to us and move from that level that time.
Great. Just two more questions. I'm sorry. Or comments, really. One, I really appreciate and enjoyed listening to the special services that your department provides. I think that's great. The programs and partnerships, and especially the school field trips, I think that's a great use of our resources. And finally, as you talk in terms of commuter rail, and I hope that comes earlier than later, just as the other council members have indicated, if we could include a route west to both the outlet mall and the fairgrounds, I think those two areas certainly would be well served with respect to commuter rail. And that's all my questions. Thanks again for your presentation.
Ed?
I want to echo all of David's comments. I agree with everything he said. I want to ask on the GPS systems, will that be on every bus or just selected buses?
It'll be on every one of our buses and every one of our paratransit vans, and also we'll be looking at doing that on our supervisor vehicles as well. So
is that one company that then leases that to us and manages it, or do we own the GPS? We own the GPS
purchasing that, yes.
Okay. Now, can you push that data to cell phones, or is that a question for IT or?
Okay. Just for the benefit of what he said, it was included in our RFP that we would build in that capacity to do that.
To push the, and it's real-time data.
Yes.
So you're pushing real-time data to people's cell phones.
Yes.
About where the bus is.
Yes.
Okay. I want to say something about subsidies. I want to make sure that the public understands that by far, we talked about a lot of different subsidies, by far the biggest subsidy that the city pays for is for roads and private vehicles. The 2007 bond allocation for street spending is $500 million, or roughly 17 times the budget that you're talking about. The most concerning of which, or the least justified in my opinion, is the widening of streets from 2 lanes to 4 lanes, and we talked about that in the past. I went to the Congress for New Urbanism meeting in Madison, Wisconsin last week, and a consultant from Atlanta was very persuasive in looking at studies, especially from California, that is not wise, that we are making a tremendous, extremely expensive mistake. We're spending some $40 million just on the roads north of Memorial and west of Portland to widen from 2 lanes to 4 lanes, sometimes with vehicle counts as low as 2,500 a day. We could delay that to a future bond. The demand is not there today, and there's a phenomenon called induced demand where you do that now and you just pull cars towards the road and create congestion later. But when I think of the $40 million, which dwarfs the other kind of subsidies we talked about, the $40 million that we'll spend just on widening roads, just in that one sector of the city, and I think about, I was struck by the data where you see this drop in ridership on snow days. And I look at our bus stops, and I wonder why we don't have the, I don't want to say decency, but why we don't have, it's shameful that with the Oklahoma wind and snow and rain and hail, that we put our people out on parking benches with nothing to cover them. And you see that kind of drop in ridership on snow days. What exactly? And sometimes we don't even have parking benches. There's just a sign, and they can stand there or they can sit down on the grass. It seems preliminarily like a fairly good deal for Tyler Media, who's spending not very much and getting these advertising revenue. What exactly would it cost to protect our riders from the elements by putting something over their heads at these stops?
We know that right now the stops that Tyler has out there cost them in the neighborhood of $6,000 to $7,000 to do the installation, which is the stop and the concrete pad that it sits on. We've had conversations, and those are owned by them. We actually own, the transit agency, own only about 5 or 6 shelters here in town. The nice part about the shelter program is the fact that they maintain those so that we don't have staff to be able to maintain a large volume of shelters. So that would be something that we would have to consider if we were going to get into the shelter business. We have talked with Tyler as they got into a discussion with folks on Western Avenue. Western Avenue is doing some street enhancements, Northwestern, and they talked about they would want some shelter types, but not as big as we currently have, and so Tyler was working on a hybrid shelter site that would be a style that would be a little less expensive, but still provide some coverage overhead as well as on the sides. It's something that's still in design, and we're sensitive to that. They came and talked to us and said, hey, here's something that wouldn't cost us as much. Would you have any objections if we looked at doing something like this throughout the city? Clearly, what we have is a sign on a post, as you pointed out. Bus benches are privately owned. The revenue that's generated off of those goes to the private bench owners. We see it as an amenity from the standpoint, at least it gives our patrons some place to sit. But you're right, you're still exposed to the elements, and which one of us would choose to stand out in the rain and wait for a bus for any length of time? The shelter program, again, we got into a program with Tyler long before I came to the transit agency, and the issue is one of capital costs to build them, but probably the bigger issue is the ongoing maintenance costs associated with it. We do have a program, and I do want to point this out, that we do have an obligation to the federal government from the standpoint of making sure that where we place shelters, we place them in fairness to all members of our population, that we don't just place them in an area that maybe generates a lot of advertising revenue for Tyler, and they do share advertising revenue with COTPA on the shelters themselves, not the bus benches. We do have an obligation, though, to make sure that where we place those shelters, again, are evenly placed so that no segment of our population goes without in favor of another segment of our population getting all the benefits. And so therefore, we have established a criteria to try to maintain that integrity, and we tend to put shelters at locations where we have multiple bus routes that may cross each other, or routes where we know we have high ridership volume. And at least those elementary criteria that are out there help dictate where some of our shelters go. A lot said to try to come back to your points, but $6,000 to $7,000 a shelter, and the labor to maintain them is the big thing that we have to look at.
Well, I mean, maybe a more comprehensive assessment for me of what that would cost. Just one street on 192nd Street with vehicle counts of 2,500 a day, that's $3 million. What could you do with $3 million in capital improvement? How would that affect our transit system? In terms of the outlet mall, that is already subsidized by the taxpayers, and I'm wondering, since it's going to create some 1,000 jobs, mostly of which are minimum wage or very low-paying jobs, it's my understanding that in other cities, these type of developments, the developers of this outlet mall will have some type of transit system themselves. I mean, has there been any talk of the outlet mall development, who stands to make all this money and who's already subsidized by the taxpayer to come here, could have some kind of transit to our transit hub, that they provide that service instead of us providing, would it in effect be an additional subsidy to get those minimum wage workers to their outlet malls?
We've not been privy to any of those conversations, nor have we participated in anything like that.
Okay.
We can contact with them and work with them and see if there's something that we can, they'd be willing to
I think that's a good idea.
Anybody else have a question for Rick?
In reference to the bus stops and the benches, I would like to say that, before we throw one company under the bus, that I've had several conversations with Tyler and also with you, and I think you all have been very receptive in reference to looking at, on a comprehensive basis, of the location of some of the bus stops and studying this issue to see if there could be some modification as it relates to being more friendly to our riders. So I don't know whether or not Councilman Shadid was aware of that, but Tyler and Rick have been in conferences with me on several occasions in trying to address this issue. I also want to make point to the fact that there's also other companies that have some of this street furniture that's out there that I think we probably need to put a little bit more pressure on them in reference to their locations and the conditions of the furniture that they have on the streets. So, not to give the public any, reason to think that there's only one company that's involved in it.
Okay. Yeah, Gary? Every year I hear us talk about transit, and I hear the problems that we have furnishing an adequate transit system in Oklahoma City, and I just can't help but keep going back to the same thing over and over again. We hear studies, there was one quoted, a Brookings study or something that was quoted recently about how bad we are with our transit system. I would love to see somebody do a study that tells us how we're doing in comparison to other cities of 620 square miles. Because I don't imagine there's a city out there that's trying to cover 620 square miles with a every 15-minute bus system. And that's the challenge we have here. If you want to take, I was sitting here in my head thinking real quick, let's take, for instance, what you spend on a transit system and what you spend on shelters and what you spend on all this other stuff. And let's reduce that down to 200 square miles. Let's cover 63rd to 59th Street and Portland to Bryant or so. That's about 200 square miles. You could probably have a pretty decent bus system in that coverage area that I just explained right there. You're not going to give bus to everybody outside that system, but I'm just, and I don't want it to sound like I'm anti-public transit because I'm not, but the citizens need to understand when they listen to these kind of conversations that the challenge we have is covering 620 square miles with any kind of a transit system. I just, in all the times that I've gone to other cities and all the studies that I've read and all the things I've read about transit systems, I'm always struck by two things. It's either a small geographic area, and it's usually accompanied by a specific tax just for transit. And more than likely, it's a tax in a regional transit system, so that everybody in that metropolitan area is helping pay for that system to give everybody an adequate transit system of some kind. So I just don't want people out there thinking that we consciously and purposely do a bad job of covering Oklahoma City, because I just think that we struggle with so many things that are different than other cities out there. And it just keeps coming back to me every year when we go through the budget talks that if you want to have a system that has a great frequency, that has great coverage, that has shelters, that has a GPS system on it and tells you when they're coming and all that kind of stuff, then you need to think about what area can we cover to do that with the money that we have. And that's another one of my rantings, but every year I keep focusing back on the fact that we're covering a geographic area that I don't imagine anybody else in the country is doing without what I discussed in the way of a tax or a transit system.
Ed?
I want to pick up on what Gary was saying, because Steve Blackmar, when he wrote about the Brookings Institute, which ranked Oklahoma City 84th out of 100, asked you about that, and your answer was the problem our board faces is, do you try and cover a large area and not do it very well, or do you cover a small area and do it very well? That decision was made a long time ago, and now it's very difficult to change. So the question is sprawl, the never-ending sprawl, in effect making it more difficult to provide transit to our citizens?
Well, for those of you who may have seen my commentary in the Gazette, I spoke to that, and the bottom line is it's hard to operate an efficient transit system when you have to cover such a large area. And so there's a lot that comes into play, and when you talk about the suburban migration of people, and now we've got suburbs that have business to business. We're still operating with a system that says you live in the suburbs and you work downtown. But there are a lot of people who live in the suburbs and work in the suburbs, and we don't make very good connections with that. And now that takes you back to your land use policies and some of those things which are outside of our boundaries in terms of what we need to do. But clearly it presents a problem to us to efficiently be able to provide a service. I mean, Gary's points are right on. I mean, Councilman Morris, excuse me for the, are right on because of the fact that it's very difficult to do that. And my statement in the response to that Brookings Institute statement, or Steve's question, was the fact that our board is very sensitive to that. But when you've got 93% of your riders are transit-dependent riders, you start talking about making wholesale changes to your system, and a lot of people are going to be impacted by that, and it's going to be a difficult political decision.
Let me try to get a final comment. I'm probably naive to think it'll be the final comment, but this council inherited the bus system and routes we have. We didn't place it into a blank map, and the problem is trying to shrink an existing system. If we were starting from scratch, we wouldn't create the system we have. I feel comfortable with that. But it's very, very difficult to shrink. And I think that's the challenge of sprawl. It's not that we're trying to cover 620 square miles by our choice, but when you inherit a system, it's very, very difficult to start eliminating routes. And to start increasing frequency increases the cost and where those costs come from. So with that, Rick, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate what you do for transit.
Next up, we have two of our internal service funds that are coming up. We're going to start with IT, and Chad Milburn is coming forward. And whereas people are talking about transit all the time, I don't think as a councilman you get a lot of calls saying, you really need to add another system analyst to the budget. Or when the general services come up, nobody's really saying, if you could just add a night shift to our vehicle maintenance, this would be a great city. But the fact of the matter, those type of decisions are what support the departments everybody cares about, making sure that we do have our police vehicles on time and out there running. And using police as an example this morning, the technology that we provide to the police department has just increased exponentially over the last few years with the Wi-Fi we provide and the records management system we're putting into place. And the tools we're putting into the hands of those officers is just, it just kind of blows me away with what they have at their disposal these days. And the guy that keeps all that running is Shad.
Well, I don't keep it running. We have staff to keep it running. But my name's Shad Meldrum. I appreciate the opportunity to present the IT budget proposal for next year. I wanted to highlight some staff that's here. First is Stacy Bone. She runs one of our lines of business. David Grothy, Kerry Wagnon, who runs public safety, and then Felice Ponkilla, who is our management specialist, helps put together this whole budget. If you'll turn to page 205, that's where our budget proposal starts in the budget book. I want to start with the department mission. This is straight from Leading for Results, which we've done for several years now. The mission of the Information Technology Department is to provide business solutions and technology services to city departments so they can better serve the Oklahoma City community. We have a picture up there of something that we just went live with recently, and that's the ability for citizens to pay parking tickets online now. So that's citizen service. It's available on okc.gov. Next slide. Again, from Leading for Results, we're going to highlight a couple of department issues and strategic results. First one we want to highlight was business process improvements. This is the decreasing availability of IT resources to analyze business processes in order to identify potential efficiency and service improvements through new and existing technologies. If not addressed, will result in several things, but missed opportunities for business improvements, potential inefficiencies in cross-departmental processes, and unnecessary complexity for some citizen services. The graph we have up there shows the level of IT staff relative to our budget for approximately the last decade, 10 years. So you can see that while our budget has increased for all this technology we've been putting in triple, our staff has maintained almost exactly the same. So with the same staff levels we were 10 years ago. Our staff does an excellent job of meeting with departments to make sure that when we buy technology that we maximize what we're going to gain out of it for efficiency or improve citizen services. With the cuts from last year, this is an area where this has become somewhat of a major issue. We've really scaled back on some of the strategic planning we're doing with departments as far as the technology they're investing in. Next slide. Another department issue to highlight is required skill sets. Increasing demand for advanced technology creates a growing gap between required skills and available skills for both the IT department and all other departments, which, if not addressed, will result in possible increased system security risks, increased disruption to critical city services, inability to sustain critical city systems. The reason we're able to do more with less staff is because we've improved how we operate in IT, how different departments operate. But to do that has increased the complexity of what we're trying to manage. So without maintaining these skill sets within the IT department and within other departments creates these issues. Want to let everybody know that really right now on several critical systems we have one IT staff member that's the expert on that. So we don't have a whole lot of redundancy. That person's on vacation. We have lots of times where people get called on vacation to answer questions about how to get something running or keep something from failing. So our staff in IT is definitely very hardworking. They work nights and weekends so that during business hours systems are up all the time. And I tell people there always seems to be a crisis in IT that a lot of times the users aren't even aware of. So there's definitely always something going on that people are managing. But this issue really addresses also trying to maintain skills within the departments too. As we put in new technology, people that have worked in the city for 20 years have all these new demands on them to be able to use this new technology. So this is another gap we'll talk about later as far as our IT training that we try to provide. Next slide. Strategic result. Again, this is from Leading for Results. The Information Technology Department will ensure that services provided to departments meet or exceed service level agreements as evidenced by. We have several measures. What I want to highlight there is we meet with departments at least annually to go over what they expect us to provide to them as far as uptime or certain level of service on different systems, and that's where we have the service level agreement. You can see even with the cuts we took last year that for the two measures, one being 65% of all incidents will be addressed within 4 hours, we're at 68%. The other one, the department had identified critical systems. We maintained at least 99.93% uptime. We're at 99.95. So we're maintaining the systems, the point being that when we did our cuts last year, we really scaled back away from assisting with strategic planning and back to maintaining our core services. Next slide. So this is our proposed budget summary. Our total budget proposal is $19.3 million, and we will have 92 positions within IT. That'll be an increase of 7, which I'll cover in a minute. Next slide. Proposed major budget changes. I wanted to highlight that last year we had a 7% increase in required contractual maintenance for all the technology that's in place. So that part of our budget we have very little control over went up by 7% from new technology that's been implemented or increased costs for some vendors. The other thing to highlight, a major change, is we're proposing 7 added positions. Really, these are restores. Last year, we took a cut of 12 positions within IT, so we went from 97 to 85 positions. So this gets us back to 92. This will help in some critical areas. We really did a fairly major reorganization within IT that is mostly kind of a survival thing. And we have people that are working. People who are supposed to be managers and things like that are answering the phone for help desk at this point. So we really are just trying to survive. Critical staffing needs, this will add 3 program lead positions. So these are within LFR. These are programs that currently have no team leaders, so we're adding people to lead those programs. 2 positions for service desk. Last year we cut our service desk staff call take entirely. We've been managing that with some part-time help, which has been working out fairly well, but we really need to have full-time staff there answering the phones. And that's where our customers are calling in as their first point of contact for IT. A position for financial processing and a position for public safety communications. Next slide. This slide shows when we sum up all of our dollars and charge it back to departments where those dollars actually apply. This is how it breaks down. The main thing I want to highlight here is for police, fire, and courts, they end up, when we go through our IT chargeback, more than half of our budget is for those functions. So that's fairly critical functions that we don't have a whole lot of leeway of if we have to do any cuts or do anything different in the future. Next slide. Department structure. What I wanted to highlight here is that we did a little bit of a reorganization when we went through our LFR process this last year, and we broke out the public safety line of business, public safety support. They used to be embedded in some other lines of business because of the nature of what they do, criticality, and those 2 programs, public safety application support and communication support, really being tied together. We decided to make them their own line of business. The other thing I'll highlight here that I'll talk about later is under infrastructure, we've broken out a communications program. That used to be network and communications, and you can imagine with cell phones and iPads and all this new ways to communicate, that's an area we've not addressed appropriately up to now in the city, and we need to have a group focused specifically on that. The other thing, too, is we moved Maps for Kids support out of administration and under our project management program. So highlighting our lines of business now, the first one would be customer support. They provide service desk and technology training functions. This is a critical function for us. When users have a problem in the city, they know always to call the help desk. That's where they're going to ideally get the most efficient service from the IT department. As I said last year, and with the nature of the cuts we had to do, we did cut our call takers and have been surviving with part-timers and other staff picking up the phone to answer those calls. But what we have also seen is our users started bypassing service desks and started calling IT staff directly, which makes them less efficient in doing the responsibilities they're supposed to do. So adding these positions back will help us tremendously. The other thing I'll highlight there is we've always had a program called technology training, which we've never had a budget for. So year over year, we've received feedback from departments. They'd like IT to provide more training to them. They'd like IT to build training modules or find training on the outside. We've never had staff there. And again, this year, this is not something we'll be able to fill. So we propose to add 2 positions. Those will be for call taking. Next one is technology application support. This group provides enterprise application support services to all departments. So these are critical city systems such as PeopleSoft, our Kronos timekeeping system across the city, cashiering systems, which gets into all kinds of security concerns of taking cash and credit cards, SAP, our work order system citywide, the new permit system that's in place, code enforcement, and SIRE for agenda management. And those are really just examples of many, many enterprise systems that group takes care of with such few people. Within this, we're proposing to add a position for financial reporting, secure data transfer. That's another one we cut last year and ended up working through some contracts to handle that for us, but it really needs to be a city person assigned to do that function. Next one. Next line or program is, or line of business, technology enhancements. They provide new technology identification, business analysis, project management, and implementation services to city departments. This one, as I've watched the presentations, we keep hearing technology from all these departments, and this is an area where we didn't specifically cut in the budget last year, but when we started moving people around to survive, we were kind of stealing from this group. So this is where we haven't worked at a level we've wanted to work with transit, for example, on some of the stuff they're trying to put in with AVL. So we've given them advice as we can, but typically on major projects like that, we would assign an IT project manager to go in and work with the vendors and make sure what we're doing as a city is the best we can do. The two slides there, the first one is animal welfare. We have worked to put in mobile data computers in animal welfare so they can self-dispatch, which has made them a lot more efficient. That's an example of what we're trying to do with a lot more departments, especially development services and code enforcement, so they'll be able to do a lot more of their business from the field. The other one is the intelligent transportation system, which we're working with Public Works on. In past years, we've put all city traffic signals on our Wi-Fi network, and now this is the system that's going in to actually manage these things in real time. So working with Public Works on that, and that should be successful. They're in the process of actually implementing the boxes and getting that thing going, so there should be improvements there. Next slide. The next one is kind of the behind the scenes, but definitely extremely critical, and that's our technology infrastructure. They provide security, network, communications, server, radio, client, configuration services to city departments. Within that, we currently don't have a program lead over one area of that, so we're proposing to add a program lead position. Within this also, this is where we're going to break out a communications program to start to address some of the communications issues with the cities, with email, cell phones. There's becoming lots of ways to communicate. Citizens now, including myself, are giving up their home phone, and you're having different ways to do this. So this is an issue in the city. We've been fairly static on how we're supporting communication technology, and there will be a new group focused on addressing that for departments. Utilities department and courts wants to address how they're doing their call center and their IVR for citizens. So hopefully we can make some major improvements in those areas for citizens. The last line of business is our one that we've broken out. We call it new, but it's not new. It was actually embedded in other lines of business before. But our public safety support, they support the public safety applications, systems, communications, and facility management for the city. Within this, we propose to add one program lead position. Again, this is an area where we didn't have a team lead over that we'll be adding back. And then one mobile communication support position to help do some of the installs of the radio systems and mobile data computers and vehicles. Two things we have highlighted there. The IT department actually runs the 911 communication center over here, so we're responsible for the facility management of that and keeping everything running within that building. The other one there is something we just received within the last week or so, and that's the Site on Wheels, which will give us capacity for mutual aid response or emergency response radio communications we need around the city and even beyond if that's the case. But that was received within the last week to help with our radio system. The reason we broke out this to its own line of business is really just because of the highly critical nature of these systems for police and fire. Trying to have them embedded in other applications, groups, lines of business didn't make sense. So this is fairly critical. They do help take care of the city's CAD system and again, the 911 communication center. And that's it, if there's any questions.
Your Honor?
Yes, Pat?
I just sort of a comment. There's probably no other operation in the city as important to the safety and convenience of our customers as IT. And yet, in the 5 or 6 years I've been on the council, and I'll have to admit I'm a technical Luddite, we've constantly added additional IT functions to the city's operations, from the improved 911 service, telephone systems we've got, and all these people walking around with iPads and iPhones, sort of thing. So we are adding to their responsibilities on a constant basis. And so I think the addition of these 7 people is critical. And my only concern is are we doing enough? Because if we lost our ability to utilize our technology that we have here, we are endangering our citizens. We rely on them for 911 service, obviously, which is first contact for fire and police and most. And so I just think that this is an issue that we need to give very careful attention to as we go forward, to make sure that we don't take some short-term savings, get by, and sacrifice our ultimate ability to utilize technology properly. It's important, like say fire and police, it probably is almost as important as weatherproof bus stops. But we need to keep our focus on the value of IT and the necessary addition to their staff as they go forward.
David?
Yes, I just want to echo Pat's comments. I think it's extremely important. And just to add to that, from an accounting standpoint, their department allows us to utilize or be able to accomplish everyone else's jobs with fewer people, more efficiently, and or without their department, things come to a stop real quick. And so I just want to echo Pat's comments.
All right.
Thank you.
Gary?
Well, I've always had an admiration for IT because coming out of public safety, I know what they deal with. It's not always easy to keep up with that equipment when you're dealing with guys that carry axes around, but they've got 2 challenges that I always want to try to keep focused on, and that is in your own world, if you're thinking your own world at home or whatever, how quick technology changes. I mean, it just, the cell phones change almost every 6 months, it seems like, and with the computers and with all the things that go on, technology moves so fast. The problem is governmental IT is such a small piece of the pie that the vendors out there are focused, and they make their money on private industry and the personal customers and so on and so forth. I'm not saying they ignore governmental IT, but at some point they're quick to drop them off the support scale. The stuff gets outdated so quick, and parts become unavailable, and everything else that goes on with it. That's one of the challenges they have here. And the other is they've got all these department heads that run out and go to these conventions and see all these fancy stuff, and they all come back and want them. They say, "Yeah, well, hey, man, you see what I saw." So they have done a remarkable job, and I'll echo what Pat said about, yeah, I did it too, Jim.
Yeah, okay.
I knew where you were headed with that. I can remember when we had notebooks like this and we had to pull up maps. Now they get to see them on the computer screen. But the reason that the citizens have not seen a sharp drop-off in their service level from this city, one of the big components of that is that IT has allowed the employees that we still have here to do their jobs much more efficiently and still get that work done. So I agree with Pat. This is a department that I hate to see do anything but grow, because if the citizens say, I got on the website and I was able to look up budgets, or I was able to look up agendas, or I was able to find out who to call on this or whatever. They're doing that because IT supports that kind of stuff. And my hat's off to them, and it always will be. Keep up the good work.
Meg?
I just really would like to compliment the department as well. I mean, I think it's a miracle that given the cuts that we took last year, we didn't have a problem. We really were extremely fortunate, and I don't think we were just lucky. I think everybody did a wonderful job pitching in, but this is a department that really needs our support in being beefed back up, and make sure you're filling as many spots, as Pat said, as you really need to run at the high level that all of our citizens require and request.
Ed?
Last month, Oklahoma City hosted the Gov 2.0 conference, and I'm just wondering if you can explain to the public what you think are advantages and disadvantages of open source code and open data systems, and what steps we might take in the next year towards that?
We're actually working right now with Public Information and Marketing to rework OKC.gov, and there's actually quite a few data sets already out there. They're just difficult to find where they're located on OKC.gov, so we're looking to redo the way that works and make it so that people can find stuff much more efficiently. And certainly anytime we find an opportunity for data to be out there that would be valuable to citizens and usable for them, we try to get it out there. But in every case, we work with the departments. We don't just do it ourselves. We will work through a department who wants to get something out there and then find a way to get it out there. And also, the other thing, sometimes it's not easy to just get data out there because the database is stored. We joke around in IT that the SAP database has field names in German. So a lot of times it takes an IT person to kind of re-massage that so it becomes usable for citizens. But certainly we'd want to get anything out there that the departments feel needs to be out there, and we're working with PIM right now to get it going.
So, concerns about security and those have pretty much been resolved, and there's not.
No, we take security very seriously, and that's one area where we would never cut is our security program and making sure. And every time we do something, we go through tremendous security review to make sure we're not doing something that is a mistake. And I would definitely say, you've seen with Sony and PlayStation, all these others, I would almost say what we do here in the city is better than what some of these others are doing that we've seen out there. So we make sure we don't get something out there that is going to cause a security issue or the way it's presented and the way it's distributed is all secure and it doesn't create any holes that way.
What are your thoughts on the feasibility and cost of pushing GPS data to cell phones?
And that's what we were working with Transit. We did some reviews on their RFP. I wish that was an area that we had a person assigned to work on that project with them. I know of the type of stuff they're doing. What we've asked for, or what Transit's asked for within that, is for a vendor-hosted solution. There's vendors that are actually doing this in other cities, and there'll be two options. One will be where the data resides here with the city, or it'll be a hosted solution where the vendor actually hosts all the data. So in that, when the vendor hosts the data, we go through all kinds of security reviews to make sure they're doing what we expect them to do.
Just take 1 second or a minute and talk a little bit about how many attacks we get on a regular basis that are trying to intrude our system.
Well, this is interesting. We've actually had to change our LFR because the numbers grow exponentially every year. But I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but people out there have tools that are automated to just go and continuously hit sites. So we've actually changed our LFR to where the automated stuff that's happening all day long, and these are from China or from addresses that are tricking us from where they're coming from. But we've actually changed LFR to look for specific attacks, and it's a constant battle. So and we have lots of expensive systems in place to make sure that we've done our part that nothing gets through. And since the city does do some credit card stuff, there's a whole level of other requirements we have to make sure we're secure.
And we are still operating the largest municipal Wi-Fi in the world, I believe. So just goes without saying. We got a lot to do. Yeah.
Just one comment, personal comment. I appreciate personally your patience in trying to help me into the 21st century. I have the iPad here in front of me, and I'm using it today for the first time. And I know the city paid for it, but your patience with me and getting me through it, I appreciate it. Your ability to deal personally with people that are as old and backward as I am is greatly appreciated. I personally appreciate it.
Thanks very much.
All right. Next up is General Services. Paula?
I'm Paula Falkenstein, General Services Director. Thank you for allowing me to appear before you today. I have with me to help me with the computer Richard Stair, our Fleet Services Manager. And
Paula, why don't you pull that microphone down just a little bit? Great. Thank you.
And in the background is Gary Goldsboro, our Facility Asset Manager, and Peter Pickett, Unit Operations Manager. Our budget begins on page 189 of your book. The mission of the General Services Department is to provide fleet and facility asset management services to all city departments so they can successfully accomplish their missions. If this proposed budget is approved, we'll have a total of 72 full-time positions in our department. In one way or another, we touch and support every other city department. One of our biggest issues is coordinated planning of maintenance of city assets. Our strategy this year, we hope, will be to reopen the Fleet Services second shift. That way, we can schedule repairs for vehicles and equipment when those pieces are ordinarily not in service. We eliminated the second shift last year as a rather drastic budget cut, and it worked very well as a cost-cutting measure. But it cost us a lot of efficiency, and it cost us, our customers, particularly police and public works, a lot of convenience. It made for a crowded working environment. I think we were very lucky that we didn't have any real safety issues. Fleet Services is on track by the end of this month to finish 10,600 total vehicle repairs. Our current LFR target for scheduled repairs is 60%, and as you can see from this chart, we're not anywhere near there. A lot of that, we believe, is because we did have to reduce the second shift. We're open fewer hours, and the hours that we are open are the hours that somebody needs that piece of equipment with which to do their job. We have struggled mightily with keeping public works in operation. Another issue that we have, like everybody else in the city, that we have suffered is that there was no CIP replacement money in the preceding year's budget to make replacements of aging fleet. When the fleet's old, maintenance costs go up. Growing shortage of skilled laborers is always a problem. We currently have 94% of all of our vehicle mechanics are ASE certified. We also are making better use of electronic facility work order system to more efficiently assign routes and priorities. One of the biggest issues for us in the city as a whole is volatile fuel prices, increasing price and usage of electricity and natural gas. Our strategy for the facilities is to use improved energy efficiency through energy management systems. You see on the left-hand side there one of our employees sitting in front of, which he doesn't do all the time, but sitting in front of this energy management system for City Hall and all of the downtown buildings, several of the buildings out at Central Maintenance, a couple of police stations and courts. This allows us to operate the building mechanic systems on an automated basis that it turn on and turn off. We can do the temperature set points, and it sends alarms when there is a piece of equipment that's in failure. We also try to purchase the most economical and energy-efficient vehicles capable of performing the customer's mission. These are a couple of the CNG vehicles in our fleet. General Fleet currently has 62 CNG vehicles. Citywide, there's 89. We have used a Clean Cities grant to pay for the cost differential between an unleaded fuel and an electric vehicle, and we expect to have 2 electric Nissans delivered to us in December. Centralized repair and maintenance services is another issue that we try to combat with improved customer service through increased priority on promised completion dates. One of the things that we did several years ago that still provides us with an excellent service is for us to have an outsourced part supply shop in our garage. This allows us to purchase items only when they're needed, pay for them when they are assigned to a work order for a city vehicle, instead of having to warehouse all of those. We've worked with the IT department to improve our city works and customize some of the electronic functions of that system. Facility asset work orders, we are on track this year to complete with 26 craftsmen, about 3,600 work orders. And one of our goals is that we will be able to, in the future, do more preventive maintenance requests than we do corrective requests. Inadequate capital repair and replacement of facilities and equipment assets is a problem. We provide expert advice and information needed to make fleet and facility decisions with those assets that we do have. This simple chart shows you one of the industry standards for determining the most effective time to replace a piece of equipment or a vehicle. And that's the time when the operating capital are operating and the capital lines cross and are at their lowest sum. Any time after that, your costs go up in maintenance and repairs of your aging fleet. I'm also the city ADA coordinator, and we do plan review for city facilities. We assist with on-site construction inspections when we're asked, and we respond to citizen inquiries and comments regarding ADA compliance. We're on schedule through the end of this month to handle about 225, not complaints, but issues, inquiries, phone calls, that sort of thing. ADA is not all curb ramps and streets and bathrooms. One of the fun things that had happened to us was this children's water fountain was advertised as being totally ADA compliant. 30 minutes after it was in our shop or in our warehouse, we called the manufacturer and said, come get it. There's nothing ADA compliant about that. Facility asset management operates and maintains 840,000 square feet of facility space in the 3 downtown buildings and the buildings out at Central Maintenance Facility. We provide maintenance and repair services to fire, police, parks. We do indoor-outdoor lighting installation and maintenance and graffiti removal off of city buildings, primarily parks. We'll have about 100 work orders by the end of this year with over 500 man-hours involved in that. The picture you have there is General Services people replacing a complete sewer line at a Parks Recreation facility. This map shows that General Services is all over the 621 square miles you've been talking about. Not every facility that we maintain or that we offer service to is on there, but it does give you some idea of the windshield time that facility services people have and how many locations that we service. Facility enhancement program, we do remodels, new installations, epoxy and concrete flooring systems. This is the before and after of the kitchen at Fire Station 24. We manufactured all the cabinets, installed all the equipment, and then put in a new stained concrete floor. One of the biggest advantages of the stained concrete is that there is no scrubbing, no waxing, no buffing ever needed again. Aquatic facility safety and maintenance is seasonal, but it is a big part of what we do. The picture on the left is one of the very first steps that we have to perform in order to get a swimming pool ready to open for the season. The picture on the right is a typical control system for a spray ground. Each one of those valves is similar to what you would have in your home irrigation system, and it's estimated that on a busy day, those valves are activated by children about 1,000 times a day. This is a picture of the inside of our maintenance facility for fleet services out at Central Maintenance. We do repairs, preventive maintenance, fast lubes. Number of vehicles in the fleet on the particular day that we put this slide together was 1,806. Our uptime goal through our LFR program is 95%. We have struggled many times to keep Public Works at 93% after we shut the second shift. We provide replacement, rentals, disposal of vehicles and equipment, analysis, assessment, reporting services to department managers. This is a picture of the Fleet Services repair shop out at Central Maintenance. This is our fueling system at the Central Maintenance. We have 2 underground storage tanks, 10,000 gallons each, one unleaded and one for diesel. We have a slow fill CNG station that we broke ground about a week ago to do an upgrade to a fast fill station using $1.28 million of federal recovery money. Our fuel tanker makes deliveries to fire stations and parks for their storage tanks, and effective July 1, we will be able to offer a wet hose service for Public Works equipment in the field. For facility asset management, the major change that we have requested in our budget is the restoration of daily custodial services to downtown campus and Central Maintenance facility. As a drastic budget reduction last year, we reduced our janitorial service to a level that was less than daily and a lot less than satisfactory for our tenants and for the visitors to our buildings.
That's an example of something we did last year during budget cuts that seemed like a pretty good idea when we were in the budget conference room, but in practicality didn't really work out so well.
A Fleet Services major budget change that we have proposed is the back addition of a field operations supervisor for a second shift. We also have been in conference with the budget office, and we feel that $738,000 is needed to increase in our fuel budget. Half of our revenue is a chargeback for fuel from the other departments. We do not add a fee for processing all of that. We buy about 1.5 gallons of fuel every year. Through April, our cost was $2.49 a gallon. We have paid as much as $3.24 a gallon, and we're hoping that we don't have to pay more than $3 a gallon next year on average. Another major budget change that we've requested is to add a data systems technician position to provide reconciliations of our fuel charges. Our fuel is about $4.6 million out of our budget. We need a lot of quality control within that area. We do fuel system exception reporting. We check to see that the price that we're getting from all of our vendors, which includes city service stations with whom we have contracts, if they're really charging us the price that's set out in that contract. And that's the ADA compliant line that sits out at Lake Hefner that the manufacturer replaced for us. And our lines of business in general services include ADA compliance, facility asset management, and fleet management, but our major line of business is customer service. Thank you very much, and I'll try to answer any questions you might have.
All right, questions for Paula? Pat?
Your Honor, thank you. A great report. A couple of simple, quick questions. Do you maintain any of the buses at all?
No, sir.
Any of the fire equipment?
We do their support vehicles, their SUVs, things like that, but no, sir, not their fire trucks.
How about the police vehicles?
Yes, sir. We maintain all of the police vehicles.
And you added on your additional people a supervisor that would enable you to put the second shift back in operation?
That's correct.
Where are all the second shift workers going to come from? When you eliminated the second shift last year due to budget constraints, did you just absorb all those workers in the daytime shift?
I believe we cut one position. It was vacant at the time, And we then cut the supervisor's position. That was a retirement. So they were both savings without having to eliminate people. We just eliminated positions. And what we did was we brought all those people inside. And in many times, especially with the heavy equipment, it's very difficult to get them, all the people working at the same time. So we had people working out in the elements on the equipment. And people were sharing a bay. We had 2 mechanics in lots of our bays that were designed for one.
But the short answer is we'll move the nighttime people to the daytime operation.
Yes.
And so we're going to move those back.
So that's where the additional people come?
Yes.
Will come from the staff, second shift. There'll be people who are currently working the day shift. They'll move back in.
There will be no new additions to that except the supervisor. That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Comments or questions for Paula? Ed?
Are any of the pools that you maintain saltwater?
No, sir.
My understanding is that saltwater pools would be cheaper to maintain and much healthier for our citizens. Has anybody ever looked at conversion or?
That would be a Parks Department decision.
Okay. Do you have an opinion on maintenance?
I think maintenance would probably be about the same.
Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else have a comment or question? All right, Paula, thank you.
Thank you very much.
And our last departmental presentation this morning is the Utilities Department, and Marcia Slaughter is coming forward.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. I'm pleased to present the Utilities Department operating budget for fiscal year 2012. It begins on page 401 of your budget book. With me are Debbie Reagan, Brett Weingart, Bill Little, and Lori Smith, all of whom have a strong role in creating the operating budget, working with all the divisions in the department. The Utilities Department is your largest business operation, with a total budget of $87.5 million proposed and contract operations of $36 million. We're funded entirely by customer payments for services. The solid waste, water, and wastewater lines on your City of Oklahoma City utility bill fund our operations. We're very proud to be a manufacturer in Oklahoma City. Our manufacturing commodity is a low-priced, high-volume output called water. We also provide public health services in that we provide sound treatment and disposal of wastewater and collect and dispose of residential solid waste. In the presentation this morning, I'll tell you a little bit about how we serve Oklahoma City and the operating divisions who do that work. We'll then highlight a few of the budget changes as we go along. There are only about there's an $800,000 increase in our budget and not a tremendous number of changes, of notable changes. Then we'll talk about where our money comes from, what the source of our operating funds are, and last, give you a couple of looks at the CIP for this year. The Water Quality Division operates our water supply lakes, treatment plants, and pumping stations that deliver treated water to customers. Our LFR standards for this division are generally met, with one exception I want to draw your attention to. You'll notice that we pumped less water from Lake Atoka over the last few years. In fact, we're at 59% of the days we were able to pump water from Lake Atoka this year, which is why Lake Draper is so low. And that's because we were rehabilitating the pipeline and the pumping stations that bring water in from southeastern Oklahoma. We expect that to resolve. The work on the 6 pumping stations between here and Lake Atoka is complete for all intents and purposes, and so we expect that to be meeting that standard in the future, and also to be diverting more water from our water supplies in southeastern Oklahoma again, getting Lake Draper filled over the next couple of years. Almost half of that division's large budget is for power and chemicals. It's very manufacturing. Again, we're manufacturing a physical chemical treatment process. The wastewater quality division takes the wastewater away and treats it. They operate our lift stations and the federally mandated industrial waste pretreatment program required of our wastewater discharge permits. They also manage one of our large operating contracts, the Veolia Water North America contract for operation of all of our wastewater treatment plants at about $13.5 million. Line maintenance, they're the pipeline people. It's pretty kind of self-explanatory. They also operate a 24-hour day, 7-day-a-week call center for emergencies. You see water flowing in the street, you can get us 24 hours a day. But this division has a notable change in its operating budget I'd like to mention. A total of 3 positions of the 7 we propose adding to the budget are included in this division. We want to improve the work we do assessing the condition of sewers, particularly in neighborhoods. We use TV cameras and have for decades to look inside the sewer and assess its condition. It's an inobvious asset, a buried asset, so you need to find a way to look at it, and television cameras do a really good job of that. For the last 2 years, we've concentrated on cameraing those locations where we had a customer problem. So there's a direct cause and effect. We want to stop sewer backups and overflows, and the way you do it is to find out what specifically was wrong and make certain you got that fixed when you were there. That took away from our ability to look at whole areas at a time. We've done less area investigation, for example. Instead of looking at a mile of pipe, we might look at 2 pieces between manholes of about 1,200 feet of pipe. That is taking away from our ability to diagnose larger area problems. We're doing a good job of fixing point locations. I've lost some of the ability to fix broader areas and want to put that back in by adding these personnel. In the meantime, while this is a very local problem solution, our capital program does include broader area-wide sewer assessments made by consulting engineers. Customer service is the place where we take in the revenue. Our net total meters read and bills sent is about $2.5 million a year. Last year, they took 500,000 customer calls, more than 500,000 customer calls. While we resolved more than 90% of those on first contact with the customer, we did find that our timing for picking up the phone calls has deteriorated. ACWID authorized us to begin working with a consultant to resolve some of those issues. This becomes a balancing between telephone technology and SAP technology to make certain our folks are perfectly organized to answer the questions that we're getting in the best time possible. So that work's underway, and we expect that those measures, including call answer time, will improve as we go through this additional work. Solid waste literally does help keep our city clean. The Solid Waste Division collects trash and bulky waste for 74,000 homes and small businesses each week. The division manages our large contract with Waste Management Incorporated to collect 114,000 other residential and small business accounts and to provide curbside recycling. 2 years ago, we rerouted solid waste to improve the time of day that we get out of neighborhoods. Big effort. Very happy to report solid waste crews are getting out of neighborhoods by 5 o'clock each day, 100% of the time. Waste Management, who's looking at some routing changes that we'll, I'm sure, be discussing with you before we would consider those, is doing a little less well, so our overall percentage is about 93%. Engineering, of course, plans and manages our capital projects for us. Last year they completed 70% of all capital programs on schedule. In that division, we propose adding 2 staff engineers to assist, again, with the overall output of work that's going on in the division, where we're currently averaging $100 million a year in capital investments. Administration are the people who support us and do things like develop the budget, provide business services, safety and training. That their very large budget is reflective of charges that we pay to Oklahoma City government for the services it provides us as a business, IT services, risk management services, and all the other things that the software for collecting money and distributing those funds, PeopleSoft, Inova, all critically important to our operations. Wouldn't be successful without them. And that total is about $12.7 million out of our total budget. So in summary, it's 733 people, a budget of $87,556,000. It's a 1% increase over last year. We added 7 positions. Fuel prices, we changed our fuel budget proposal by $366,000, the largest individual change in the budget. That's about a 18% increase in our total fuel budget. We added $183,000 for maintenance and repair, and about $250,000 net total for personnel costs. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about where our money comes from in the broad general sense. We're about 15.3% of the city's operating budget, shown in that slide in blue. The department budget itself comes at $10.9 million, or 12.4%. It comes from OSEAT. The remainder comes from Aqua, the water fund, and the sewer fund.
And that money comes from water and wastewater fees generally paid by our citizens on
yes,
monthly basis.
base charges and volume charges, monthly, the standard monthly solid waste fee for services. Total estimated income for Aqua and OSEAT this next year, based on our revenue forecasts prepared by our financial advisor, $239.3 million. Again, of that, our operating budget's about $87.5 million. The Aqua budget has been reviewed and includes a total of $195.4 million. Utility operations are 38.6% of the Aqua budget, or $76.7 million. Debt service is 21%, and capital expenditures are about 24% this year. The OSEAT budget, the OSEAT slide that we show you is based on forecasts made by our financial advisor some time ago. In this case, OSEAT's fascinating in that more than half of its expenses are contracted. The waste management contract, landfills, fleet services, street sweeping, I'm sure I'm forgetting some things, are the propensity of the OSEAT operation, OSEAT overall expenses. We are looking forward to a capital investment for OSEAT, which I'll discuss with you in just a minute. But I want to draw your attention to the slide includes a set aside of $1 million for a CNG fueling station in the overall OSEAT investments. Talking just briefly about the CIP. In this slide, you see a picture of a very large concrete tank that's a 10 million gallon a day treated water storage tank just completed at the Hafner Water Treatment Plant, went into service this week, just in time. And something we don't see very often, a geyser water line break. We're actually glad we don't see those, but they're unique. Water CIP highlights again, we're in construction at the Hafner Water Treatment Plant on a $48 million expansion of that facility that will increase the plant capacity from 75 million gallons a day to 100 million gallons a day. We believe we'll have a little more peaking capacity than that once we actually put the plant in operation and agree with DEQ about what the total rated capacity of the plant will be. But we have to test it first before we'll be able to get a final rating above 100 million gallons a day. Relatively cost effective, although some of us remember when treatment plants cost 50 cents a thousand gallons. This one's $2 a thousand gallons. It hurts, but that's actually a very good price. Our engineers came in telling us it might be $5 a thousand gallon, or pardon me, $5 a gallon. I'm getting my numbers. $2 a gallon, not $5 a gallon. Good creative design. good work underway. You can see that the site is in heavy construction at this point. Finally, on wastewater CIP, we're making improvements to just about every wastewater treatment plant. The notable project this year, the wastewater system's largest lift station pumps about half the flow into the North Canadian plant, our 80 million gallon a day wastewater treatment plant, is being fully renovated, pipes and pumps and valves being replaced at a cost of over $10 million to make that facility, which was underwater in last year's 500-year storm, bringing it back to contemporary standards so that we'll be able to rely on it for another 30 years without major investments. Solid waste CIP, as already mentioned, is fleet and big blue carts and recycle bins, and we'll look forward to discussing with OC the concepts for CNG equipment. We do expect CNG equipment to grow. We've been working on that heavily in the last couple of months, looking at data from what we considered pilot testing. We're finding drivers are willing to operate CNG vehicles. That was a concern because people are a little bit afraid of CNG. We also find that they are cost effective. We're able to maintain them, and that was a great concern for us as well. Now the challenge is finding enough fueling stations to make it practical for all the places our crews go in your 600 square mile service area. That wraps up the utilities budget presentation. Of course, we're happy to answer questions.
Your Honor, I just want to make sure everybody understands. This is the largest single component of our budget, but it is a budget that is essentially paid for by the people who use the system. Yes. All the revenues are derived from the fees we charge for water, sewage, garbage collection, all those sorts.
There's no general fund dollars into the water and wastewater.
Yeah, I would want to make that point clear because it is such a large number, and it is a significant part of our operating budget in terms of the total, but in terms of general fund impact, there's zero. Thank you, Marcia. And Marcia, you did a great job on this.
Yeah, Larry?
Yeah, Marcia, I just wanted to go and thank you personally for the residents of Ward 3 for the great service that you and the Water Department have given and the wastewater over the last year. It's just fantastic. And on a lighter side, last night I was at a neighborhood meeting and a gentleman came up to me. So I've got a new challenge for you. He said that a water tower that's now abandoned at Northwest 6th in about Pennsylvania, he said, is there any way that you could paint that with some friendly message and beautify it a little bit? So if you could add that to your budget, he would sure appreciate it. But on a serious side, thank you for all you and your staff do.
Marcia, thank you.
Can I ask you a question? Do you have a breakdown on what it costs to provide services in terms of waste management and water in different areas of the city?
No. No, generally by fund.
Well, first of all, we don't serve the entire city in regard to water and wastewater services. There's, probably 2/3 of the 629 square miles. And I'm guessing on that, Marcia, about that's probably close. It's probably a third of it we don't serve.
Yes.
But of that 2/3, do you have a sense for what it costs in different areas of the city?
We really don't. It's for example, it's generally one pumping plant. There's 4 different pressure zones within the area, but 80% of the city is within one of the pressure zones, and so it essentially, we run it on a utility basis, and so therefore we have not broken it out into the costs in certain areas as opposed to other areas.
But, yes, true cost of service studies are possible, but very complex and debatable. We do work on cost of service to, again, assess, for example, what it costs us to deliver service to an address versus the commodity charges it costs. We look at that on a broad scale because, for us, all customers are treated equally. And we like that. Other utilities do that work. We may be able to find some references about distances.
On solid waste, so we do have differentiation in rural rates versus urban rates. And it really isn't as much a difference in the rates as the level of service provided to those folks. We have a higher level of service provided to the urban customers than we do on the to the rural customers, and how you determine rural versus urban is based upon densities that they have. And Pete wants to comment on that.
Well, in one sense, the cost of this utility, this is different from roads and other kinds of things, because this utility, as Pat pointed out, pays for itself. I mean, the utility itself generates the revenue to pay for it. I'm talking about water and wastewater. There are other parts of it that do not, perhaps, but water and wastewater definitely pay for themselves. So expansion of the system, you just spread the cost over more people. I don't mean just, but the cost is spread over more people, and it still comes out break even. The question is more, and I think maybe more where you're going, Ed, is the question is whether or not it's fair to the people in the inner part of the city that have already paid for theirs to continue to build it out. The system as a whole pays for itself, as does very similar to the way the gas company does, or the electric company, or the phone company, or any other utility does. The question is whether or not it's prudent long-term to continue to build out when the people that are on the inner city have already paid for enough water lines, they've already paid for enough treatment facilities, they've already paid for enough storage to solve their problem. So the question is more urban versus rural, as opposed to whether or not there's a cost that's spread back to the budget, because there really isn't a cost that's spread back to the budget in this particular instance.
The impact fees, that water and wastewater have had impact fees, gosh, since I think you put them in back in
1986
or something like that.
1986. You want me to tell the story again?
Well, you may
I don't want to tell the story again.
The fact is we have not increased those as we should over the years, and so Ms. Lauder's been pushing heavily to get those increased, and that was kind of caught up into our overall impact fee analysis, but she has a desire to increase the impact fees to be a more equitable process.
Yes. You're asking a policy question I can't answer. I think that we could give you some information about what it might take, what other people have done to try to answer that question. Oklahoma City has had the experience of, because we serve other cities, we've had a rates question by the water utility in War Acres and the Village. But we also supply wholesale service to several other cities around us. We have rates that we think are very defensible for those other cities, but we have been through rate litigation, so are particularly sensitive, I think, to specialized rates and tend to avoid that information, perhaps because we got burned in the past. Doesn't mean that's the right attitude for us today. I don't know the answer, but happy to help you with that.
Okay. Meg, and then Ed.
Yeah, I did just have a comment, Marcia, if you don't mind. Yesterday we had an opportunity to talk. We've had a few citizens come before us concerned about recent increases that we've made in the water rates. And I think we've been very clear about the fact that we needed to reinvest those dollars in the system to continue to provide the service that we need. But we did have a chance to visit quickly yesterday about some ways that people can control that increase in cost.
You want to make certain that your pipes don't leak. You want to make certain that you're using water as wisely as possible. We can help customers through our H2O program and assist them with short-term needs for help with their water bill. If you've had a break in your system and it's an honest break you could not help, we sent you a very large bill. You do have the opportunity to ask for an adjustment from us if you can show us that you had a plumbing problem that you corrected. It's a lengthy process, takes a while, but it's valuable to customers who get surprised by a sudden bill that wasn't because, like me, they forgot to turn the sprinkler off in the backyard when they went to bed, but was because of a catastrophic problem at their house.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Ed, then Larry.
Well, I think Pete hit on it, and that is the cost of providing water in the inner core versus a brand new development on the periphery would intuitively be different, even if the study is complex and difficult to obtain. and yet we charge everyone the same. And so an argument could be made that those with existing infrastructure are subsidizing new development. What would be your opinion on the impact fees that are now 25 years old? I'm hearing that you have some opinion. Do you think they're adequate? Do they need to be changed? Do they?
4 years ago, the utility proposed increases that essentially quadrupled the impact fees. Yes. Yes. Those were not enacted. We would need to relook at them now, again, because it's been 4 years since we made the 5 years since we made the calculations. Truly, it is a policy decision how we generate the income that covers the cost of the utilities, infrastructure, and operations. It may be possible to slightly decrease a total rate change with large impact fees. The side effect of that may be this complexity of the situation. Side effect could be shifts in where growth occurs, including utilities that abut next to us, but aren't inside Oklahoma City. So very complex. Again, happy to help you with the utility side, but I understand we would have a lot of work to do to address that question.
Larry?
Just to refresh my memory, Jim, much of the development that's going on in the outlying areas of Ward 3 out in the southwestern part of our city, we have adopted a policy that I believe is in effect that we do not, as a city, run water lines out there for the people. That is the expense of the developer himself. And as a result, a number of the people who are buying in those remote areas have gone to the expense in the purchase of their house to put in their own water well system to supply their water. And they've also put in their own sanitary system, septic system for removal. So the funding of the development out in that area has mainly been done by the developer and the citizens who have bought the houses out there. Is that a true statement?
Not just out there. We make it a pretty hard, fast rule that we do not extend infrastructure for development.
Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Following that, though, I made one of my notes here on my new gadget to send to the city manager, but it is that I think we should look. I think we ought to take a look at whether or not that rule has served us well, because I'm not sure it has. I'm not sure we shouldn't pick select areas and at least make an effort to try to do some planned infrastructure as opposed to waiting until the cost of it is so expensive. I'm not so sure we wouldn't take a second look at that, because the people that are building houses in the area that Larry's talking about, in my most of the, at least certainly in the geographic area that I represent, are paying lots of money for water and septic systems that could be utilized to expand the system if we would be smart about how we did it. I think there may be the possibility to expand the system and let that cost be borne by the people that are buying into it, but because over the long term, water wells and septic tanks are not a good way to look into the next 50 years of what development's going to be like. It's just not a good idea. And I think one of my notes here is to let's at least open up a discussion about maybe an area where we experiment with it, where we bring water, where we bring sewer to a system that it's not far from it, and charge people to tie onto the system and see if we can control development a little bit that way, as opposed to the kind of Topsy-like growth that we've seen in the past, where then we're bound to come out and try to fix it after it's already there. I mean, it's a thought. I just think it deserves vetting in a public way so we could figure out what if we really are going in the right direction.
Anybody else? All right, Marcia, thank you. I think that concludes the presentations and discussions for the budget under item 1 of the Finance Committee. We're ready to adjourn the Finance Committee and move forward. All right, we'll reconvene the council meeting, and we move on to item 5. These are items that require a separate vote. Item 5A is a public hearing regarding the fiscal year. So this is our second opportunity to have this brought out. This is a public hearing if anyone has shown up today to speak about the public hearing.
One of the things I want to point out, and particularly to Councilman Greenwald and Councilman Shadid, is that it's not typical that we don't have people here for the public hearing process of the budget process. I've been doing this for a number of years, and this is a year where we're adding back programs that we've previously cut. Last year we didn't have that opportunity. So last year the council chambers were filled, for example, for the fish hatchery. And we all remember that one person, and it generated an inordinate amount of activity on that one specific program. The year before, it was I remember it was one of the transient issues where the after-hour service that we were proposing some cutbacks, and again filled the chambers and had multiple hours discussions about that. So that I don't think that means the public doesn't care, but they're more motivated when there are cuts being made into an area that they care about, as opposed to this year where we're rebuilding some of the things we've cut back in previous years.
Okay. I have a question on the budget. In the Neighborhood Conservation Committee meeting last week, we had a proposal that was recommended by the staff to increase funding for our contract with Neighborhood Alliance by about $57,000. And I was curious as to how that gets into the budget, if indeed it is there. And if it's not, how do we go about recommending that be added to the Planning Department's revenue budget, I guess, for a contract with Neighborhood Alliance?
I was aware that was made, and we can add that, clean that up as we go forward.
It's a relatively small amount, but the process.
Right. If I may, I was made of that after the memo went out Friday afternoon, but there were some. I was planning on talking about that when we got into the other, but we can talk about it now. And the fact of the matter is that was recommended out of a council subcommittee, and I can't tell you that $50,000 cannot be added to a $300 million general fund budget without. It's somewhat insignificant.
I think his question is, though, if I could restate it, is how did it get on there in the first place?
How did it get on our budget? How did it get on our agenda?
It was a request by Neighborhood Alliance.
They asked for it to be on there.
Yes, sir.
Neighborhood Alliance asked for it, and the request went to the Planning Department.
And they brought it forward to the council subcommittee.
Agenda for the Neighborhood Conservation Committee, and that was one of the recommendations that was in the agenda, was to approve that, because the Planning Department is intending to ask the Neighborhood Alliance for additional work in their Strong Neighborhood Initiative program.
All right, we have a motion and a second on item 5A. Ready to vote? Cast your votes. Budget process moves forward. Now we will on to item 5B, and this is, I understand we do need executive session today to discuss our negotiations. How about a motion there? Cast your votes to move this into executive session. That's moved. Any items from council? Pat?
Just a question, Your Honor. On the television the other night on the news, there was a representative from ACOG talking about the hot weather and the possibility of ozone alert days. And he indicated there was a very real possibility the city would exceed EPA limits on ozone, and that there were some penalties involved. And my question is, what are those penalties, and what plans does the city have to deal with those ozone alert days that might be different from what we've done in the past? Free bus rides, recommendations, sort of.
I'm not sure I can answer all of those things. We've done reports in the past on that. Obviously, not obviously, the EPA has lowered the standards, and we came through last year in pretty good shape. But as we go forward, if we are in a certain number of days that exceed those limits, then we become non-containment. We have I think it's a 3-phase plan that goes into effect. Some of those are, for example, changing the type of fuels that are available at gas stations, the different fueling mechanisms that go in at gas stations, and it ratchets us all the way up to the inability to get additional air permits out of the state for new industry. So there are different levels, and I'm sorry I can't be more specific on which restraints are in each stage of it, but I can get you back some information on.
Jim, as I recall, isn't it a 3-year period, though, that when you start collecting your non-containment days, it's over a 3-year period, which is a rolling 3-year
rolling average, that's correct.
So because the last 2 years have been relatively intact, we're not susceptible to this third year unless it's just a really, really bad year.
But the fact of the matter is the standards have lowered, and so it's more of a challenge to stay within.
The standards have been lowered. Are those retroactive? Do they go back and look at our past
I don't think so.
days of
I don't think so. There's also some question as to how forceful the federal government will be, because like us, a lot of other cities are in the same situation. And putting forth what might be considered an unfunded mandate is probably not the best idea in these economic times, and so there's significant question as to whether or not they'll follow through with the enforcement of those standards. But there's no question the administration, actually the previous administration, placed those in with the idea that they would take effect.
But I'd be happy to get back with you on the follow-up reports. I haven't looked at them.
There's no hurry on. I was just curious because of the comments that there were some penalties associated with being a non-attainment area.
Yeah,
and there are.
It is. I serve on the DEQ. In fact, I'm the municipal representative on DEQ's Air Quality Control Board. And as I look at it, it's inevitable that we're going to be a non-attainment. If you just apply the standard that is in effect now to where we were a couple years ago, we'd have been in serious trouble a couple years ago with this standard. It is set up to. It's almost a system set up to fail, it looks like to me, in terms of forcing other things on us and on our communities. There's not any, and especially because of the way it's calculated. It's not it's calculated by taking the air here and judging what that air quality is here. It's not calculated at the point source of the pollution. In my view, that's where it ought to be calculated. The penalties ought to go to the people that are creating the pollution. When you have pollution in more, you can't blame the more pollution on the traffic in Oklahoma City because the wind blows from the south. That pollution there's got to come from coal-fired plants that are in Texas that blowing that pollution on us.
Or the Dallas Metroplex.
Right.
We could send them a bill.
Right. Well, I mean, that's the system is just a messed up system, it seems to me, when the source of the pollution is not who pays the price for the pollution. They can stay in compliance and spew enough pollution on us that we then have to suffer serious penalties for it. And I don't see any hope for that because the municipalities don't have near the lobby that those that are spewing that pollution do. But
the EPA's strategy for a long time has been to associate non-point pollution areas. The fact that we're going through this Attorney General's appeal of an EPA rule is a non-point source pollution impact effect. Right. And it's due to coal plants, not in Oklahoma, but in Texas.
Right. They're the ones that cause it. It's the Texas air that creates our problem.
Skip?
And this is probably a question to the manager. Is it possible that the city could engage in a conversation as it relates to safe rooms, either storm cellars, in wake of the continued losses in the numbers, obviously is increasing as it relates to tornadoes in our area, to see if there was a way that we could support some legislative agenda as it relates to some type of tax break or insurance issue to encourage individuals to have storm cellars or safe rooms?
Yeah, we'd be happy to do that. We'd make it a part of our legislative agenda next year. We can certainly have that discussion. Obviously, it seems that when there's a tornado, then all of a sudden there's a lot of discussion, there's a lot of stories about it, and then, when July comes and the tornadoes go away, then we kind of forget about it until the next following April. But yeah, we can certainly have that discussion and make it part of our legislative agenda.
Okay. Meg?
Just two quick things, Mayor. I had the opportunity on Wednesday to attend a groundbreaking at Capitol Hill High School. Partnership with Oklahoma City Beautiful, the Margaret Annis Boyce Trust, the Community Foundation, and the Capitol Hill Alumni Association. There were so many folks there. It was a wonderful. Councilman Greenwell was there in attendance with me. It was a wonderful day. And Friday night, the Hispanic Chamber hosted their Viva Sabor event at the Istvan Gallery. They had so many people in attendance. It was just wonderful. I wanted to congratulate David Castillo and Elena Troya for putting on a really wonderful event.
Okay. David?
Well, I'd like to thank Meg for attending the groundbreaking ceremony at Capitol Hill, and just to comment that the group does plan to pay for all maintenance of the new trees and the facility, so that's very encouraging. And then secondly, I'd like to thank Dennis Clowers, the Public Works Director, and Craig Keith from the city's legal staff for attending a meeting last night with some of the property owners in far southwest Oklahoma City who've experienced some flooding issues the past several weeks, and I know those property owners were very appreciative to have both of those gentlemen attend and listen to their concerns and begin working on their issues. Thank you.
Pete? Larry?
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. I'd like to also thank David Castillo for his Viva Sabor and the hospitality showed my wife and I Friday night. Great event. And I'd like to also congratulate the neighbors in Musgrave Pennington, an area that has had a very vital, ongoing neighborhood association for a number of years under the capable leadership of David Carroll and his wife Margaret, who after about over 10 years have decided it's time to turn their attention to other things. And the challenge that David gave for the neighbors before the meeting was, unless somebody comes forward and takes up the reins of this organization, it's going to fold. And over 75 neighbors showed up. A number of them volunteered for new positions. They've got a new executive team put together. And so congratulations to them. And my encouragement to the neighbors of Musgrave Pennington is get behind your new team, Angel and her staff of executives. They have a great plan being afoot for a neighborhood night out coming up in September. And they also unanimously approved a decision to increase their dues, almost double their dues in order to fund ongoing activities. So the enthusiasm is there, and it's really encouraging to see a neighborhood that's going to get behind their neighborhood association and move it forward. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thanks, Larry. Ed?
I need to revisit what we talked about last week in the sale of the Vitagraph property. I remain perplexed and concerned by that transaction and the implications. The almost 100 people that I spoke to last night at the FBIR and Zachary Taylor neighborhood associations also were very concerned, and I think that needs to continue to be vetted. In 2001, that property was bought by Richard Dunning and the Hudson Reno LLC for some $1.4 million. 8 months ago, they came to the Mary Gardens Foundation, a nonprofit, or the Mary Gardens Foundation asked to buy that property from Hudson Reno LLC for the purposes of providing for relocation of displaced Mary Gardens office and maintenance facilities. They received the funding from the Economic Development Trust in the form of a loan for $4.2 million after getting an appraisal from Michael Stacy, who appraised that property at $4.2 million. At the time that transaction took place, negotiations, the contract was being negotiated for the city to turn over Mary Gardens to the Mary Gardens Foundation. Fast forward to the last couple of weeks, the 42-page contract was finalized, and the very next day after the contract was written, Jim Couch was approached by Jim Tolbert, who indicated that we had to hear it the very next week. In less than a week time, we had to put that contract on the council with the mayor, David Greenwell, who's an accountant, and Meg Salyer, whose ward it is, were not here. My understanding is the interest, the $111,003, was never paid from the Mary Gardens Foundation to the Economic Development Trust. And the sense I get from Jim Tolbert, from Leslie Batcher, that from Wiley that negotiated the contract was, this is, because the issue is that Rick Dunning and the Hudson Reno LLC then claimed that the property was worth $6.9 million, claimed a $2.7 million tax deduction. When those of us who go on the county assessor's site and look at the price, it's not the $4.2 million that we paid, that was actually paid, it's $6.9 million. so that the comps are being artificially elevated. There's no asterisk that says it was actually $4.2 million. It says that land was sold for $6.9 million. So the body language and what everyone's saying, this is an arm's length transaction, this is not the business of us. Wiley said, I don't see how it's relevant. That's between him and his accountants and lawyers. Jim Tolbert said the same thing. There's a sense that there is an IRS problem here that potentially could rise to the level of tax fraud. Again, I'm just getting all this stuff and getting these appraisals and all this stuff today and 3 weeks into it. And I've hired my own accountant. I just pay him an hourly rate that's going over this, and he indicates to me that there's a potential problem with the IRS on this transaction. So the problem I have is the idea of city staff and the nonprofit saying, well, that's him. That has nothing to do with us. That's between him and the IRS. If we knew that someone bought a widget from us legally that allowed them to then take water from the city, for example, and we said, well, that sale of the widget was perfectly legal, and the fact that he's taking water from the city, that's between him and the city. That wouldn't be acceptable then, and it's not acceptable now. The fact is that transaction wouldn't be possible without Rick Dunning doing a part gift, part sale to a nonprofit. It requires a nonprofit to pull off this deal. And it requires the city and the taxpayer to provide a loan to the nonprofit for them to pull off this deal. So we are involved, and it's not okay to say, this doesn't involve us, this is just between Rick Dunning and the IRS. The other problem, as I alluded to, is that we're artificially increasing comp prices. The other problem is that when Steve Lackmeyer reports that on the Mary Gardens Foundation deal that we're going to pay $1.1 million to the Mary Gardens Foundation to run the Mary Gardens, well, that's not entirely accurate. Actually, we pay $1.1 million a year, and the taxpayers just bought a property for $4.2 million to take that off the Mary Gardens Foundation books. Because what I'm hearing from Wiley and others is that people who want to donate to the Mary Gardens Foundation don't want this thing on their books. So the taxpayers just spent $4 million to get it off the Mary Gardens Foundation's books to open it up so that then people could then donate to the Mary Gardens Foundation. So it's not that we spent $1.1 million, it's that we spent $1.1 million and the taxpayers bought a property for $4.2 million. Do we need that property? The people that are going to be working on Mary Gardens are city employees who largely already have offices. Why does the city need a property on Hudson and Reno for $4.2 million? Why does the taxpayer need that property? And if the taxpayer does need that property, don't we have a mechanism in place for them to get it, that being eminent domain? If there's a need and a justification for the taxpayer to acquire that property, couldn't we just go to Rick Dunning and say, we need that property. Here's an appraisal. This is what it's worth. If you think it's worth $6.9 million, take it to a judge and we'll settle it. But that's what eminent domain is for. You don't loan it to a nonprofit and then 8 months later take it back. You're out the $111,000 in interest. You're out the however many tens of thousands of dollars in closing costs on the loan. That's not the way to do it. And so I go back to this issue. I need time, and the people need time to go over these contracts. And it got hijacked a little bit with this 3 public hearings, and I agree with Meg, it shouldn't be restricted to a certain ward. I need to review these contracts, and what would be wrong with throwing it out there and letting the people look at it as well and say, hey, did you notice this on page 29? So all I'm asking for, without it getting so convoluted like we turned it into this thing, is instead of we finish the 42-page contract on Tuesday and we take it to Jim Couch to be put on the consent on Wednesday, I need time, and the people need time to look at these contracts. We need a month. I'm 3 weeks into it. I'm just now getting the appraisals and all the documents today after 3 weeks of working fairly diligently on this. And there's just not enough time. That's all I'm asking for. It shouldn't be restricted to a ward. It's just these contracts that are negotiated by the municipal councilor's office, I want them. As soon as they're completed, I want them to go over, and I think I should have a month. And we could just leave it at that and make it very simple. I don't think there's any way the people wouldn't support that, and I'm not sure why we couldn't. I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Gary? All right. City manager reports.
Mr. Mayor, there's a city manager report regarding some requests that came from council in regard to this year's budget. One has to do with a program similar to the SHINE program that was presented that Pete and or Councilman White and Councilman McAtee have had some interest in. And what is being proposed here is to set aside some money and to try to replicate that program through nonprofit, to go out and get some proposals and see who would be interested in that and see if we can get
That's a great idea.
some interest along those lines. The other second item brought up regarding to the operating budget has to do with a neighborhood street crack sealing program that Councilman Ryan has brought up, and I just can't be against that. I mean, we have that's a problem for us. It's the number one priority of our citizens is to increase street surfacing programs, and so we have put together a program for that too. And then Councilman McAtee also asked me about, can we, in the past, we've used some fund balance dollars for street resurfacing, and is that possible this year? And it looks like we are going to have a fund balance that's going to be not a pretty strong fund balance at the end of this year because of the stronger revenues that we had. And as we close out the books, I'd be happy to come back. If you remember, in the past, we've used some of that money for some spray grounds, we've used it for traffic signals, and we've also done it for some street resurfacing in the past. I'd really like to kind of wait until we know where we're at after we close out the books on fund balance, but I'd be happy to bring back something. And it does appear at this time that we're going to be in the 12 or 13% on fund balance as we sit here today.
All right.
Will that require a motion to amend the budget on the...
Well, I'm looking for some direction to add that into the budget for next week.
I would speak in behalf then of the crack sealing program. I think any time we defer maintenance, we run into higher cost maintenance over time. This is a program that the city has had in past years, very effective. It was cut due to budget constraints several years ago. I think we need to put it back in. And if anybody thinks it's overkill, at the rate we are forecasting 140 miles a year, it would take approximately 50 years to cover all the city streets. So this is not a quick fix, not an overkill kind of thing. This is the first step, I hope, to restoring preventive maintenance to our operation. Okay. I think it's money well spent at this time.
And I'm really not looking for a vote today. I guess what I'm telling you is that I'm anticipating adding this to the budget unless I'm hearing some problems not to add it to the budget as we go forward.
Okay. Skip?
So.
Just briefly, in reference to the graffiti program, the SHINE program has been such a fantastic working relationship with the court system and community service program, and the results have just been absolutely fantastic in reference to what they have been able to do throughout the city of Oklahoma City. And I would like to say that although I support this program as far as funding, and don't know if this would be a sufficient amount unless we do partnership with either our court system, the county court system, relates to the community service programs, and I think that's the only way that we'll continue to see the type of results that that we've received from the program as it is now. And I think the inclusion of the court system and giving those individuals an opportunity to participate other than just being warehoused in our jails has been a true success of showing how we can do some things without a whole lot of money, but with manpower that otherwise would just be sitting idle.
Yeah, Meg?
I do think, Skip, that in addition to some of this, there is an attempt to go out to the private sector and try to match some potential funding. So looking for a nonprofit that would be able to run the program and partner with the city as well as some private funding sources, I think, would add to the total available that we have in the program.
Mayor, as I envision it, this won't work without all those partnerships that Councilman Kelly's talking about. I mean, you'll have to have a partnership with the county court. One of the ways that SHINE worked was that the partnership between the DA's office, the public defender's office, and the court system generated lots of people to work And so that partnership is going to have to be, I would hope that we can find a way to make Oklahoma County a significant partner in it. This is a program that Commissioner Mon really created out of whole cloth, and he did it himself. I mean, and it's sad that what's happened has caused it to go down the way it did. And what I'm looking for is a way to put it on a more stable footing so it's not caught up in the politics of things. It just, so we can continue to run it. But without those partnerships, it won't work. Skip, you're absolutely right. $100,000 is not close to what it would take to buy all the equipment, to hire a couple, 3 supervisors, all that. It's a big number. So we're looking to put that money in kind of as the seed money and hope we can generate the kind of partners that will keep the program going and actually take it much more citywide, not just District 2 of Oklahoma County, but citywide, which will go into Cleveland County, Canadian County, lots of places where it hasn't reached it yet.
That's great. Great program. Larry?
Yeah, and the reason, of course, that we're in this position, the program was up and running and very, very effective in Commissioner Mon's area, but he was told that he could not spend county money for the supervisors to oversee the laborers who had been supplied him from the courts as part of their community service. And if you want to see the benefit to the city, you need to come out and look at Jack Cornett Park, where they did extensive work in cleaning that up. And probably the icon is Crystal Lake, where they went out and turned Crystal Lake from a tire dump into a beautiful facility that could be used by City Care to host kids from the inner city this summer for fishing and camping. And so it has a number of benefits. And this money here, again, is the seed money to put the administrative portion in place with the partnerships that would have to come along and say, yes, we will supply you with the labor, because the labor costs us nothing if we get the same arrangement that Commissioner Mon had with the county courts.
All right. Like we're good to go to executive session? All right, we'll be back.